So I am Councillor Stuart Frost, the Chair of Economic Planning and Housing, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the recently published government regulations. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting has finished. Councillors who sit in this committee are identified by name on the screen, and I will introduce officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present in a meeting of the Council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Members' Code of Conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Please can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or are on silent, and members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as having left the meeting and will not be able to take part in any votes taken on that item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand electronically and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. Officers present will will only switch on their video link during the item that they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda who will address the committee by audio link only. Councillors should declare that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest or any other personal interest in an item on the agenda. The councillors can switch on their video link when I call the next agenda item. Voting will be taken by a roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation proposed to the committee before voting begins. Can each member indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, they should immediately advise the Democratic Services Support Officer and use their meeting link to re-access the meeting again. Thank you. So, can we just go through? So I'm just getting my agenda. Okay. So I'd like to go for any apologies for absences and substitutions. I have one already from Councillor Gavin James, who sends his apologies, and he is replaced by Councillor Ryan Hickling. Welcome, Councillor Hickling. Are there any other apologies, for absences? If you can raise your hand. No, great. Okay. The only other thing I would like to do as well is to welcome David Coville, who's the interim head of the Borough Development and Implementation, who's responsible for the economy, culture, and community well-being. He will be presenting a paper with Jack. So welcome, David. Okay. I would also like to welcome Ian Boll, the new chief exec, who is going to be listening in, on the meeting. So again, welcome to him. So moving on to item number 2, do we have any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Okay, that's great. Okay. Number 3 on the agenda is urgent matters. I've not been made aware of any urgent matters on today. Okay. So unless anybody says differently, then we will take that as read and move on. Item number 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd and 23rd of July. I'd like to move that the minutes of the meeting be signed as a correct record, and I would like to second that. Please note that the only part of the minutes that can be discussed is their accuracy. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cubitt. Okay.
Yes, sorry, I have a question actually. I don't want to second it at this juncture.
Okay, so
on page 14, there's a reference to removing timely provision from the option regarding provision of new infrastructure. Now, I haven't rewatched the very long, torturous 2 meetings that we had in order to go through the issues and options, but I have no recollection of anybody requesting that we remove a reference to timely provision. And I wonder whether any other members have a recollection that we requested the word timely be removed.
Sorry, Councillor Cubitt, can you give me the page reference again, please?
40.
Of course, Chairman. It's page 14.
Okay, 40.
And it's the first paragraph in the middle of the page after the heading options for providing new infrastructure.
Page 14, Chairman, 1-4.
1-4. Okay, I mean, I personally can't remember that either. So
I can go back to the webcast and clarify if you'd like.
yes, please.
Unless you want that removed now, it's up to you.
Sorry, say again?
Unless you want that struck out now, it's entirely up to the committee. But I can go back and review the webcast and then send an email around tomorrow if you like.
No, I think what we'll do is I think we should just strike it, because I have to say that I agree with Councillor Cubitt that I can't understand anybody on this committee wanting to remove the reference to a timely provision. But there we go. I would like to have that removed now, please, Sadie. Okay, so therefore, if we have that removed, are there any other questions on the minutes? No. So if that time is removed, is the committee happy for me to sign the minutes? Yes. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So we'll crack on and get that done. Okay. Okay, so then we move on to item number 5, which was the recommendations from the Task and Finish group, considering the council motion of management companies and the non-adoption of road and environment in development. Okay, I'm assuming everyone has read the report, which at the front provides the clarification that was requested, okay, at the last meeting. If you want, I can go specifically through that. Okay, let's just get there. Okay. So basically, it was requested that the Cabinet provide a full response detailing either its acceptance or rejection of the proposals. The response was that, subject to the committee endorsing the recommendations contained in this report, the portfolio holder will consider the request. Committee members queried whether there was any planning mechanism to compel the release of land from developers, and clarification to be provided by Head of Planning, Sustainability and Infrastructure. The response there was that there is no current mechanism by which developers are compelled to release land to the council, but they can choose to do so. Where developers elect to transfer land to the council, it is subject to the transfer arrangements and commuted sums set out in the relevant S106 agreements. As responded to at the 2nd of July UPH meeting, as long as the developer makes provision for green space, then the only planning consideration should be as to whether the scheme is acceptable and the space provided, not the eventual ownership of the land. Okay, a number of the committee disagreed with the latter part of section 335 of the report, and it was argued that limitations were required. And then it was for Councillor Westbrook and myself to review. The response on that is that on the basis that there is nothing that can compel developers to release land to the council, okay, then policy formulation needs to reflect this limitation. Therefore, any wording in the portfolio holder plan or subtext to the new local plan would need to encourage and be clear about the benefits of the alternative of transferring open space land to the council, as opposed to seeking to set unenforceable limitations. In relation to section 3.336 of the report, it was queried whether proposals in the report could be applied to the Many Down project, and the response there, the approach for Many Down will be a matter of discussion with the project director and or through the Many Down Overview Committee. Further detail was requested in relation to tracking and practical administration of section 3.3.6. The response there is the approach to raising the profile of this issue, as described in 3.3.6, will be subject to further consideration of advancing the local plan through future reports to the EPH committee. I'm happy to read through the rest of the initial areas, okay, but obviously it's been out for members to read and review. So do we have any questions? Okay, Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's to do with this business about whether the council can, I think force is the probably too strong a word at the moment, is to encourage or require that developers hand green open space to the council. I don't know how many other councillors on the committee saw in the press, I think it's front page in the Gazette, of a piece of open space in Lichpit that maybe Councillor Cubitt could respond to this, as it's in her ward, in that some land, the Green, I believe it's called, in Lichpit, was sold to a private individual from the developer. And there was a rumor that there was going to be a planning application put on it, but it quoted the council as having, I don't know who it was directed to, this is the trouble with reading stuff in the Gazette, that the council had required that land to be transferred to the council so the open space could be preserved. I'd like officer comment, or maybe Councillor Cubitt might be able to shed some light on it, because in that report, it sounds as if it's going, that the council is using some kind of power to get that green space, quite rightly, I might add, into the control of the council and preserve the green space in Lichpit. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Sorry,
Mr. Chairman, yes, Mr. Chairman and Councillor Miller, if you'd like me just to very briefly explain. This is an unusual situation because it was covered by a Section 52 agreement, which was agreed between the developer and the council in 1981 or thereabouts. And the council, I understand, I've been advised by the legal department, have a charge over the land, and we have been maintaining the land for the last 40+ years. So I don't think it's useful for the future. I think it's an unusual, circumstance, but I do understand explicitly from our legal department that we will compel whomever buys this land, because it's now been sold twice by the auctioneers in 1.5 months or 2, to hand over the land for £1. So whomever's paying, and the last price that was paid was 19,000, is going to end up with rather a large hole when they're given £1 by the council in exchange for finalising the Section 52 agreement.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt, and just to state that this report is for basically land going forward, okay, and was in response to certainly development at Highclere, where Highfields, where land was not given over to the council with the commuted sums, okay, but effectively kept by that particular developer and put through a management company, which basically means that residents there were paying exorbitant management fees over which they had very little control, along with council tax. Okay, so just moving that on forward. Okay, so
just to interrupt quickly, sorry, Chair. There were two public speakers who wished to.
Okay, I do beg your pardon. Okay, we'll move back to the public speakers then. Okay, are they online, Sadie?
Yes, they are. Mr. Beavers, I'll put Mr. Beavers through first.
Okay, so if we have Mr. Beavers through first, okay, basically what I will do is I will welcome Mr. Beavers to the committee, okay, and then hand him over to Councillor Canescu for the timing side of things. Have you got your stopwatch ready, Councillor Canescu?
I have primed and all ready to go.
Right, okay, so welcome Mr. Beavers, how are you?
Very well, thank you. I think I'll be within the 2 minutes.
Okay, so what I'll do, I'll hand you over now to Councillor Canescu, who will time the 2 minutes. He will advise you when to start speaking and also advise when the 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Beavers. Yes, you've got 2 minutes to speak. I'll start the clock in just a second and I'll give you a 30-second warning in case you are running close to the allotted time. So without any further ado, please go ahead.
First of 4 points. Did the task and finish group consider recommending reductions in the large sums of money secured from developers for play areas to release more for restoring and maintaining natural green space, for providing outdoor learning for children, as well as ensuring land was transferred to the borough? 2. Would councillors understand being characterised as profligate and even wasteful in their approval of huge sums of capital and maintenance spending on play areas and other hard infrastructure, while starving nature, providing pitiful support to community volunteers, and zero investment in child outdoor learning? This planet cannot afford another generation as ignorant of its environmental impact as this one. So we ask councillors to reassess priorities. 3. Reference is made in the report to a community cooperative. We do need a debate on nature and a community-based approach to holding and managing natural green space. We also need councillors to support such a debate and open discussion with it. 4. Council taxes pay for green space management. Has the council acted indefensibly by not adapting to realities, with the consequence that new homeowners are incurring double taxation? Don't homeowners have a moral right to be compensated with a council tax reduction by council, and will they be? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beavers. What I will do is I will take those questions away and we will provide you with an answer by email. Okay.
Thank you.
2 questions. Okay, yes.
We have Mr.
Right.
Beerman.
Okay, so now the next speaker is Mr. Martin Bierman. Okay, welcome to the EPH committee this evening, Mr. Bierman. Okay, I'm going to hand you over now to Councillor Canescu for your 2 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Bierman. As the Chair has just said, you've got 2 minutes to speak. I'll start the clock shortly and I'll give you a countdown from 30 seconds in case you're running close to your allotted time. Okay, so we shall begin now, please.
Thank you. I had previously always thought that new public roads were adopted as a matter of course, subject only to certain parameters like access to over 5 dwellings, for instance. I was shocked to learn that it is now a free-for-all, which I personally compare with developers suddenly finding an interest in giving rebirth to ground rents and the like. The paper is orientated largely towards green spaces, but to my mind, roads and paths are just as important in this respect. I appreciate that these are largely the responsibility of Hampshire, but the borough still has sizable influence. It is distressing to note that this topic has been in circulation since 2015, that's from the papers, and there are still no measurable and firm conclusions on the question of roads. Highways adopted by the local authority ensure consistent management and standards, though often underfunded, I will admit, and allow better opportunities for future upgrade, especially with regard to changing social patterns, which might mean different layouts are required. I urge the panel to address the roads, cycleway and footpath aspect of adoption. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bierman. Okay, so those were the only two speakers I have listed. Are there any more, Sadie, or is that it?
No, do the committee have any questions for Mr. Bierman, or is that?
Certainly. Any questions for Mr. Bierman? Anybody? No? Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Bierman. Okay, I have Councillor Miller. You spoke. Are you wishing to speak again, or is it a question of just okay? You're all done. So if you can just lower your hand, your electronic hand, that would be wonderful. Okay, Councillor Hickling, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick, I guess, technical question from me on this one, because it's the first time I've had a chance to view this report, considering I'm standing in for one of my colleagues. So under the proposed recommendations, we've got indexation of the S106 agreements being linked with the retail price index. So I'm just curious as to why we would choose to use the retail price index as opposed to something that's a more accurate representation of inflation.
Good question, and it's one that I unfortunately can't answer. Don't have Dave Perkin here to answer that. So what I'll do is I'll take that away and supply you with a written answer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor George, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just again a matter of interesting clarification on that. In terms of proposed recommendations, recommendation 2 is to reduce the number of years over which commuted sums are calculated to either 15 or 20 years. It's just a point here of we're making this recommendation, but I don't know quite who will be responsible for making a difference as a decision about whether it should be 15 or 20 years. Who's going to be responsible for that? Is it the officers or the cabinet or what have you? And what criteria will be used to, it's basically, as I understand it, a matter of trying to make this much more, should we say, desirable for it to, or cost effective in lots of ways, I think, for the developer to hand it over. But it just seems a little bit hanging in the air there. It should be 15 or 20, but there's no guidance or who's going to be responsible. It's just a question there, please.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor George, thank you very much. The ultimate deciders, as I understand it, will be the cabinet. Okay, when it's discussed there, because they will have to either vote to adopt the recommendations or not. Okay, there were two values. One was put at 15 years, and the other one was put at 10 years, basically to show potentially, okay, what any economic cost would be to the council. Because at this particular time, okay, the maintenance charge is actually pushed out at 25 years. So it was all about trying to give the cabinet the opportunity to basically make a come to some form of decision, and the offer there was potentially 15 years or 10 years, and that would be the economic cost to us. Moreover, it's all about trying to make the giving over of land as attractive as possible, because there is nothing at the moment, okay, in the local plan, or even potentially in the new local plan, that would actually, you know, compel developers to actually hand the land over to us. They could quite simply just refuse to do so, okay, and continue to put it down through a management company, which would, you know, cause untold distress in future years for residents when they're presented with, you know, bills that they don't have, you know, any control over. So it's more a question of just presenting the recommendation to Cabinet and giving them a couple of options, and you know, giving Cabinet the choice, to be fair. Does that answer your question, Councillor George?
Thank you. Yes, I fully understand that now. I think I understood the basis behind it, but it was who's going to be responsible for making that decision, and is it going to be 15 years or 20 years or somewhere in between, I guess. But it's really who's going to be responsible for the decision making.
Sure, the decision making will be Cabinet, okay, when it goes forward. Right, does anybody else have any more questions? Yes, no? Great. Okay, then what I'd like to propose is that we present the report to Cabinet to go on the Cabinet work programme, you know, for a decision. Is everybody in agreement with that? Yeah. Councillor James, yes, no? Okay, okay. All right, thank you very much. Then what I will do is, thank you very much, members. We will refer the report to Cabinet, and I will keep you updated on its progress as it goes through the system. Okay, so now moving to, where's my agenda? To number 6, the economic recovery framework. Okay, where we should have Jack Kennedy and also David Coville.
Chair, and myself as leader of the council, if I may.
Yeah, by all means. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry to make a few of you laugh there. Firstly, can I thank you as a committee for moving the last item to ourselves as a Cabinet, and we will review it in the strictest terms and come back to your committee or perhaps full council to say, look, this is what we've decided to deal with in the management company world, and the adoption of our open spaces within new developments, and perhaps older developments like the Green has been pointed out by Councillor Miller earlier, that do need to have a full stop at the end of those things to give residents some certainty as to their futures, and obviously not go through the distress of having to think that somebody might be building on the open space close to them. So thank you for that, committee. If I can now move to the economic recovery framework, I think we are all aware that the situation with COVID has not hit the worst yet. I think the movement of the furlough scheme to 70% in the last week, plus the realization that some jobs will not continue, is very clear in our minds. Even clearer in mine today, if I have to be honest. My son has just been told of his redundancy at the end of the month. So there is nothing more important than ensuring that we in this borough have a framework that encourages new investments, supports existing businesses, and allows those that wish to alter, adapt, and change the way that they work to feel that we are fertile grounds on which they can sow their seeds for the businesses of the future and the opportunities that those will give to all. I have, as you all know, written a foreword. Now, my job is not to repeat that, but to say to you as a committee that this report was not just written by myself or my input, but by officers. And I'd like to thank Jack Kennedy and Daniel, who's on holiday at the moment, for their input in this. Trust me that this is vital to what we are as a borough, and that I will take any suggestions from yourselves as a committee, but also rest assured that we have got new, vibrant ideas of how we can ensure that our residents have the best opportunity to earn a living and support other businesses within the borough. I hope that you have read the report. As has already been pointed out to me, it's quite Basingstoke centric, and I apologise that we have not perhaps included the rural communities, the larger communities of Tadway, Whitchurch, Overton, and Kingsclere within it in specific terms. That is remiss, and we need to make sure that those communities feel just as supported as the communities in Basingview or at Chinham Business Centre. We need to make sure that everybody feels that they will get some help and support from us as a borough, and that we will listen to their words of wisdom. We will put a framework that will help them going forward, and to give them the best opportunities, whether that be through grants, accessing central government money, making sure that the LEP is in our corner when it comes to provision for 5G, for a fibre spine through Basingstoke, and to make sure that we are fit, not just for the post-COVID world, but for a world that would have been changing anyway. Some of the things that have happened through COVID have not come as a surprise. They have just escalated them and sped them up through our economic lifeblood throughout the borough. Jack and myself, and with Ian on the call, are happy to take any of your thoughts. You can go through section by section if you wish, or perhaps you'd like to hear from Jack on some of the initiatives that he has been supported in from the administration and what he deems to be the priorities in this report, and may pull out something for you before you get a chance to interrogate us in what we will be doing immediately and into the future. Jack, do you want to say something now?
Yes, if I may, thank you. So just to introduce myself to any councillors that I haven't met previously, I'm Jack Kennedy, Economic Development Manager at Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. So I just want to put this paper in a bit of context before we move into discussion. It's clear that we are moving through the phases of the impact on the local economy. We've seen through the initial impact and the aspects of the crisis, and supported our businesses and residents through the funding made available, and helped to enable businesses to survive wherever that's been possible. Just locally, we provided over £50 million worth of support, either through rates relief or direct grants. And we've been recognised as one of the most effective councils in terms of getting this funding out of the door to businesses who need it there and then. This paper is more about not looking backwards to everything we've done, although that is reflected in the appendices, but actually looking at our role now to think about how we act alongside partners as a catalyst for economic recovery and stimulation in the area. We know we're already seeing long-term impacts on our local economy, whether that's in terms of unemployment, and as Councillor Raskin mentioned, that could even be further impacted when we see the reduction in the furlough scheme. But July 2020 saw the highest claimant count in Basingstoke and Dean since April 1994. So, and that's whilst 25,000 people, 25,000 residents, sorry, are still on furlough. So there is a potential for a great deal of further impact. But we're also seeing a lot of impact in terms of consumer and business behaviour, whether that's in terms of working from home or changes in terms of how people use town centres and retail and online deliveries. We're also in the world where we're not expecting further government measures to be announced, apart from in terms of more specific funds. So things like grants potentially for innovation or to support climate change, or potential support for specific sectors. But actually what we're seeing now is more of the reduction in terms of that central state support, the reduction in furlough, but also the clawback in some of the grant schemes that happened at the end of August. We weren't impacted as a council because we had spent all of our grant schemes and shared them with businesses in the borough, but a number of local authorities will have been impacted by that. So the paper in front of you is not necessarily a strategy. It's not an action plan yet. It's more of a framework for us to build around what we want to deliver. It focuses on what we see as the key themes for economic recovery, from which we can then build out specific action plans. And it's really built upon the foundations of the economic growth strategy, which was adopted back in March 2019. And whilst that was written in a quite different economic context, actually many of the key themes still remain very relevant. So there are sort of 9 key themes. I'm not going to sort of labor them all now, and we can go into them individually if they're of particular interest, but we've identified 9 key themes around clean growth, jobs and skills, which I will touch on later, business support and entrepreneurship, sector support, innovation and technology, commercial property and housing, transport and mobility, place marketing, and place shaping. And then under each of those, we have identified what we see as being the priorities for us and others to deliver in the next 12 months. Collectively, it seemed, I would say it's an ambitious set of priorities, and there might be some prioritization that is required, and it would be interesting to know the committee's view on where they see, they feel our energy should be focused going forward. I think 2 things I'd like to really draw out of the report, particularly in relation to the fact that some things have slightly changed since the report was submitted a couple of weeks ago. One of the things I'd like to draw out is the fact around what we've tried to present in the recovery framework is that we have to be realistic in recognising the economic impact of COVID, but actually there's a potential for opportunities here in terms of how we respond to it and how we can support our businesses to grow, and how we can make Basingstoke as an ideal place for economic growth. So there are opportunities around, as Councillor Ruskin mentioned, the 5G Living Lab, our fibre spine connectivity, to allow people to work from home more effectively, but also to place ourselves as a great place for connectivity for businesses to move to Basingstoke. There's an opportunity for businesses to think about how they relocate their supply chains, moving potentially from China to Chinham, so they can access goods and services closer to home to help deal with potential future disruption in supply chains. We are well located as a town and as a borough for businesses looking to establish office premises outside of London to help staff minimise their commutes and to reduce their rent overheads, as a number of businesses are looking to do. We've been working to establish an e-commerce platform which will support businesses to pivot to an online model and help smaller retailers in particular. And actually what we've seen during the last few months is some of our key sectors, such as digital, pharmaceutical and manufacturing, have been those in most demand, whether it's working on potential of a future vaccine or working to manufacture ventilators or PPE, etc. They have seen an increased demand in the needs for them. I think the other thing I'd like to draw out really, because it's really important, and obviously it's the thing that we see has the most direct impact on residents, is around jobs and skills. And I think there's been some significant developments since the paper was submitted a few weeks ago. So yesterday, the government issued guidance on the Kickstart programme to support 16 to 24-year-olds who are at risk of long-term unemployment. Locally, the Hampshire Chambers of Commerce will play a coordinating role to support businesses to come together to apply for that scheme, because otherwise there's a minimum requirement of needing to offer 30 placements. And clearly smaller businesses aren't going to be able to do that individually. But we want to support those who can offer 1, 2, 3 opportunities to young people to be able to do so. So that's a significant step recently. We also had a significant step in terms of the fact that a bid that's led by Hampshire County Council for an apprenticeship and skills hub has been successful at accessing EU funding to support people from across North Hampshire to access apprenticeships and to actually raise the profile of apprenticeships for businesses in the region. And the third element, which is touched on in the paper, is around a potential bid for a youth hub, which has continued to develop recently. And now it looks likely that we'll look to submit a joint bid with Hart Borough Council and Rushmore Borough Council to strengthen the opportunity for a youth hub physically located in those 3 locations to support 18 to 24-year-olds get back into work. So there are 2 really key themes that I just wanted to draw out around opportunity and I guess the specifics around jobs and skills. What I was hoping that we can be discussed tonight is around the overall view of the framework, how you feel the 9 key themes cover the right main areas, or whether there are issues that you believe to be missing. And it's a good point around ensuring that it's not too Basingstoke centric, and that will need to be reflected in future versions of this. And whether there are particular priority issues that you feel the council and its partners should be focusing on. Thank you.
Okay, Jack, thank you very much. Okay, David, do you want to say anything?
No, thank you, Chair. I'd just say I agree with both the leader and Jack around prioritisation. I think that's going to be one of the challenges. There's so many initiatives, so many partners looking to do really good work, that a challenge is going to really prioritise our efforts and resources to make the biggest impact.
I agree. Okay, so I'm just writing down the list, okay, of hands. But before we kind of go into to that, I personally would like to say generally that I welcome the report. Gosh, I have to say that I wouldn't know really where to start on here. So I think officers have had a good stab at this. However, I was disappointed, okay, to see that it was very Basingstoke centric. I know that obviously a lot of the plans can move forward into each of the centres such as Whitchurch, okay, Kingsclear, okay, and Tadley. But I was quite disappointed to see that it was very Basingstoke centred. I also, after having read the report, I welcome the fact that we have something in here which is a 12-month focus, but which had a list of the priorities that were in there. Okay, but I just wonder whether we could shorten that and we could actually have, say, or split that out further, so we have a 6-month focus, a 12-month focus, and an 18-month plus focus. Okay, you know, I just think that that would. I know that would involve a lot more thought and work for officers, but I just think that it would give us a bit more of a detailed plan to be able to kind of move forward with. However, I'm also cognizant of the fact that you know, certainly anything under 6 months is liable to be kicked into touch by anything that happens through Hampshire County Council or national government. But I'd still like to see it there. And on that point, it's questions to officers. So I'd like to start off with Councillor Cubitt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right. Hi, Jack, and good evening, David. We haven't met. I think it's an interesting paper to start. But I wanted to ask you some questions in relation to the paper. Jack, when you and I visited companies last year and the beginning of this year, we talked about the number of companies that were operating in the borough. I think it was 7,500. That our economy was valued at about 5.4 billion. And in particular, that the sectors that are supremely successful in our borough are IT centric. And I just wondered, so the first question is, are you aware of any of those numbers changing? You don't have to answer immediately, but I'd like to know whether that's the case. And specifically, if true that we're the fourth largest IT area in the country, certainly I'm aware that IT companies around the world have actually thrived during this pandemic, and actually it's been a game changer for them. And that therefore, whilst we can all discuss the doom and gloom, actually, if our borough's predominant sector is IT, I would be hoping that we're actually going to see the opposite of what other areas are experiencing. So I'd like your views on that. And linked to that, therefore, in terms of jobs and skills, we talk about apprenticeships a lot. I think that the most important area of focus for the borough, because at the end of the day, we can't kid ourselves that we really have anything to do with the private sector. We can try and help be facilitators to make it a more attractive place. But the reality is private sector does what private sector does, and private sector does well. You know, they're back to work, and some of them are thriving. But if we've got an IT-centric sector and it's the fourth largest in the country, what are we going to do to make sure that our children in our schools excel in the jobs that the IT sector are looking to fill? And that would be the area that I would really like to see the borough focusing its energies. So that's one issue. Second issue is I'm really concerned about retail. What everybody knows is that the pandemic has, to a very great degree, basically caused companies to do what they would have done over a 7-year period in a matter of 4 months. And those companies that were going to have real problems, their problems have come at them much quicker. And we already had massive issues with the Festival Place and empty stores. And I want to know what the borough is going to do to make sure that Festival Place is the go-to. And I'm specifically really concerned, certainly with my children, the loss of certain stores, which are flag stores that will ensure that Festival Place is a go-to place going forward. Because we always cite this figure of the 20th, which when we say that, we mean it is the 20th, not it's one of the 20th, but it's the 20th go-to retail outlet. And I want to know where we're heading on that, because we've lost Zara, and we've lost. You know, what are we going to do to facilitate and enable Festival Place to be a better go-to place? You know, is somebody trying to encourage Urban Outfitters to Basingstoke? Why has Zara gone? And personally, I think it's catastrophic, because people that I know are now not going to Festival Place at all; they're going somewhere else. And then, sorry, I don't want to be too long-winded, but
can I just stop you, please? Can by all means come into your third point, okay? But I'd like to keep it quite general, because then I'd like to go through the report section by section. Okay, so but please, you know, carry on with your third point.
Yeah, so the third point is, you know, we all celebrate that we distributed 53 million, but I would quite like to know from Jack how many millions we were asked of, and to what size companies the grants went, and how did we determine which grants were dispersed? Because if it is true that our economy is 5.4 billion, and we're one of the most important employment and economies in the region, you know, how was that distributed, and how much request for financial support was not delivered? Because that's always the other side of the coin. So those are my comments for now. Mr. Chairman, just to put it into context,
yes.
The IT questions and queries was to do with sector support. The jobs and skills was interrelated with the sector support, but is also in the jobs and skills section.
Sure.
And the retail was in relation to place shaping. And
Sure.
the question in relation to funding is reference section number 3 on 53 million. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cubitt. Okay, Councillor Koneski, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a number of specific comments, but in light of what you've just said, I'll save those for when we go through the relevant section. So just a couple of general comments. First of which is, I guess, from what we've seen at both a national and international level, intervention by governments and the public sector needs to be ambitious. It needs to be innovative. We've got to try things that we haven't tried before. The Eat Out to Help Out scheme, I guess, is a great example of that. And we've got to be prepared to invest. Yeah, there's a lot of talk at the moment about how we actually pay for all of the investment in the furlough scheme. But I think most people would agree that it has preserved a lot of jobs, certainly up until now. And it's encouraging to see from this report, Jack and David, that you know we're seeing all three of those elements: the ambition, the innovation, and some willingness to invest, which is obviously great. I wonder though if there are some additional opportunities for us to consider to take that a step further, and perhaps we can discuss those when we go through the section by section. The other point is sort of around this talk of sort of being Basingstoke centric, which I know a number of councillors have raised, and equally Councillor Cubitt is talking about the need to focus on Festival Place, on the centre, on sort of the anchor of our retail offer. I think it's also important that we consider how to invest in our local centres. So obviously, as a councillor for Brighton Hill, we have the Brighton Hill Retail Park there. And I think it's just a case of recognising that where there are challenges, the flip side is that there are opportunities there as well. So there's a lot of talk in the media at the moment about certain sandwich shops closing in city centres and business locations because people aren't commuting into those anymore. But the flip side of that should be that people are using some of their local services. So those local centres, which perhaps have been neglected over the past few years as people have tended to gravitate towards the centres, may now become more important, particularly with the green agenda as well, that the council is pushing that, and which is interwoven into this document. So it's just a point that when we are talking about the focus of this, should it be Basingstoke, should it be the broader borough, don't forget the sort of the local centres within our boroughs as well, because I think they're going to play an increasingly important role in the future. And that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Koneski. Councillor Rattigan, do you want to come in on any of this?
I mean, just on Councillor Cubitt's point about Festival Place, be assured that we are in discussions with them almost weekly to understand the footfall that's going through there. I've put pressure on myself to make sure that they open the top set of toilets near the Wimpy, because the more that's open, the better it will be as a shopping experience for people who are bravely venturing out. We have talked about re-accessing some of the stores, making sure that they are allowing some of the current tenants to have deals that would not have been possible before, to encourage them to stay. So rest assured that we are doing that, and we're doing it on our own facility within the malls as well. So we are very proactively supporting retail. We understand that that's how a lot of people see Basingstoke, is a place to shop and enjoy, to come out to enjoy the coffee shops and the experience of by train, by car, or whatever, to get to us. And rest assured that retail is vital, and we will do everything in our power to sustain it. I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, I've got Councillor Harvey next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll go through the paper when you do that and pick out the points I had on the various elements, but just in general terms, can I welcome the paper and say how critical this is? And I agree with the comments that have been passed so far, that just how absolutely important the borough's role will be in this. We've always been strong, I think, as a borough council when we've been the broker. So I respect what Councillor Cubitt says, but the public, the private sector, and what we can do as a borough, collectively, there's an almost sort of symbiotic relationship that we have. And by making the most of that through really genuinely good, strong partnership working, is where we're going to see the success, I think, of sustaining the new economy as it comes forward. So I think in terms of the paper, the framework, I get where Jack's coming from, it being a framework. I like the idea of the green agenda being written throughout, absolutely underpinning everything. This is an opportunity to take control of that climate change agenda that runs through our business profile as much as it runs through everything else. And so to underwrite the entire framework by really pushing the green agenda for business and jobs and skills and so on would be really worthwhile, I think. I am worried about the 18 to 24-year-old group. I think there's a real risk that beyond anything else that age group are facing, and they were facing significant challenges before COVID, they're now going to face it even more. And I worry about the idea of a lost generation in our borough. So we really do need to make sure that we don't in any way leave any stone unturned. And those 6-month or apprenticeships and those elements just don't become, as it were, cheap labour or an opportunity for businesses to employ somebody for 6 months that there's no job at the end of it. But there's a genuine career progression that we might be able to help with as a borough, underwrite with our education partners and with our other business partners who might be working in partnership with other businesses. I think the other point I wanted just to raise in general terms was where small business is at, because I think we've got some fairly major employers that of course we want to pay attention to, but the majority of employees are in small businesses, and that's where the furlough scheme has kept their jobs. My fear would be that as the furlough scheme is effectively withdrawn, a lot of those smaller businesses are facing massive cash flow problems. It's not so much their longer term financing, it's the immediate thing of paying wages, paying tax, paying rent, keeping themselves sustained through Christmas, getting through into the new year with some sort of business plan that might give them legs into or through whatever might come at us in the new year. And I think that sustaining small business is where we could see the most impact directly for employees and for residents in Basingstoke. So elements of this strategy that might pick out, good things that we can do to support those small businesses and the small business community, I would really, really support. But as I say, there's lots of points, I think, in these separate sections that I'd like to talk about when we get that far, Chair, if that's okay. But I really do welcome the report. I thank the leader for bringing it to the committee. I notice it's going to Cabinet and will go to Council if it needs to. But the sooner we get the action around the words, the better, really. So yeah, all positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'd like to bring in Councillor Miller now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to echo what's been said so far. What I liked about this was the structure of the document. Jack's explained to us, he's gone through, I think it was 9 points, 9 headlines. But what I think for councillors was to look at the next 12 months focus under each of the headings, because that is an essential part of the framework. Because as has been mentioned in Jack's introduction, and I think the leader alluded to it as well, we're in uncertain times. We don't know when any of these particular hurdles that we're going to face as this whole COVID-19 process goes along. I think we need these place markers in this kind of document that allows us the flexibility and the agility to react to those hurdles when they appear, and then apply whatever is necessary at the time. I'm not going to come back on if we go through this item by item, because I think that's going to take a little bit of time. I've got one point that I wanted to make, apart from congratulations to the officers, and thank you, Ken, for bringing this forward, is one on infrastructure, and specifically the mention of Manydown and the opportunity to get a local skill set employed locally to facilitate the developers in putting Manydown together. I had a telephone conversation with Tony Bravo, who most of us know as the principal at BCOT. Now, BCOT is the ideal training ground for a lot of these vocational skills. Now, I've known Tony for a long time, and I broached this to him probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when, it's the ideal capability within the borough to produce skilled work people and many down's going to go on for many, many years. It's almost a career opportunity for anybody that wants to get into the construction industry. And we're also very sensitive to the fact that construction of good eco homes could be much more in the prefabricated arena than traditional bricks and mortar. Now, I've kept in touch with him, and unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, he told me he has got nobody interested in getting into the construction industry. He has tried time and time again to set up classes to open the opportunity and say, you can come in here, you can get proper qualifications for all kinds of trades that are necessary within the construction industry. And he's got no takers, literally no takers. He has tried heaven and earth. He's spread his advertising, his marketing very wide, because people commute into Basingstoke to Queen Mary's College, into BCOT. But he's found it incredibly difficult for that one item. I'm not going to go on to anything else. I just want to bring that. I'm not trying to be a spoiler, but it's part of something we're ideally placed to achieve. But this is where I think an example, I hope, that the borough can get involved as well, because we've got all kinds of tentacles out there. And BCOT would be, your career for that particular age group we're concerned about. And there's a good example, I think, Councillor Harvey, where we, together with the private sector, can help them to facilitate and spread the word out. This is what we need, and it is for the borough. It's not just for Basingstoke centric. I'm afraid when I read this paper, I saw the borough in it. It's written, the word is written many, many times. Yes, certain significant parts of the town are identified, but I saw this as a borough-wide document. And that's how we should approach it anyway. But that's my lot, Chairman. I just wanted to make that one point, and I'll let others go through the individual comments, because there's quite a lot of bullet points in this. And I think it's a great starter for 10, and it's exactly what it is. It's a framework, and you use a framework to be flexible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Okay, I've got 3 speakers, Councillor James, or Laura James, Councillor Waldridge, and then Councillor George, in that order, just for general comments, general questions, and then we'll start going through the paper section by section. So, Councillor James.
Thank you. Like others, I'd like to pick up some points going through the paper, but I suppose the overall, if we're going to look at priorities of and that this is going to be needed, I suppose the one thing I would like to raise really is the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on 18 to 25-year-olds. And if you look at the report where it references that we've got an unemployment rate in Basingstoke of 7.9 of that age group, it's very concerning. But what I think it misses, the report, and I think we need to look at, is the accumulative impact of that group. For example, there's no reference to housing, in the sense of most of that group are, if they're not living at home, are in the private sector. And at the moment, most people are protected because of arrears in relation to evictions. But come the end of the year, when that is lifted, and there's no really mention of that within the report about housing and how many evictions we're going to see, and the impact on homelessness. So I think that has to be a significant part of this work. The other thing is, if you then look at that group of people in relation to their health, and we have a mental health crisis within Basingstoke at the moment, and in relation to the lack of services. And so I think it's the accumulative impact on different groups of people if we're going to look at how we get those people back to work, or how we support them going forward. So we need to think of all of those areas, because we have a higher than national average of people living in the private sector, and we're pushing more and more vulnerable people to live in the private sector. So that's an issue, but I'll raise all my issues going through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Waldridge, please.
Hello, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leader, for bringing the paper, and Jack, and was it David? Sorry, I've forgotten. Yeah, I generally agree with the thrust of the paper. It's a very difficult paper to write, and to get it in to discuss size as you have done, it is quite some feat. So well done on that. Basically, I was gonna. I don't know if I'll home in. I think I agree with what Laura's just said. Actually, when I read through it, the thing that stuck out to me that was really sort of missing was the sort of real impact on people's mental health that this COVID has had, and this was completely absent from the report. Really, I mean, I get its focus on economy, but really, there's a lot of young people who, and older people who, in particular, who having been made redundant, or never had a job, or been through the situation of having left education very quickly and now sort of in a state of limbo, they're going to find it very, very difficult to get that first job, to get into work, and the impact on their mental health and their stress and their anxiety cannot be understated. And I think that is missing from the report. Back in the last back in 2010, when we had the last sort of economic crisis like this, and I was working for the Connection Service, and thank God, that the Connection Service was there at that point, because it was that service that really helped the young people up, sort of in their latter teenage years, get out of that recession. So they were there to signpost them to different options when they were unemployed. Unfortunately, that service is gone now. There's nothing out there for these young people to help guide them, signpost them, because it no longer exists. Likewise, at that time, there was thankfully still adult education, and a better offer for adult education, which was funded, and that links into what Councillor Miller was saying about these construction courses. Why are people not possibly getting into construction courses? Because at the moment they have to fund them themselves. It's not easy to get into them, because to do any sort of adult education, you have to pay for it. Whereas back in 2010, there was grants available. There were, for people who haven't had a level 3 qualification before, there was money available for them. So I think if the borough really wants to help, we need to look at funding opportunities for training for adult education. The report makes reference to higher education and linking in and bringing that into the town, but really very little on further education. And I think really for a lot of people, a level 3 qualification and below is what's really needed here. So I agree with Councillor Miller, linking into BCOT, looking at how we can really promote what's available there and bring on new courses and coordinate and get these people who really need the training and the skills into sort of so that they're going to get them, basically. What else was going to say? Yeah, I pointed out funding in construction and also the health and social care as well. That's an area where young people and older people, experienced people who have been made redundant, could really sort of benefit from help with training to get back into those areas, which given Brexit, we're going to need more carers and health and social workers as well. So yeah, so I think that was really it for now. I mean, the other comment I was just going to make, which has been made already, is that it is very Basingstoke centric. I'm sat there thinking about young people in Whitchurch, Overturn, and some of the rural areas who, given the public transport and the fact that it's being reduced even further, and for some people are reluctant to use it at the moment, they're stuck there without anything to do, without any youth clubs, and I just really think we need to be looking at how we can reach out to those young people as well. So that was kind of what I wanted to say for now, but I might add some more points later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge. Councillor Rattigan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Just to confirm that I am listening and will act upon your thoughts. I'm happy that if we bring something to this committee about housing and well-being, I totally appreciate where Caroline and Laura are on this in terms of the least resilient among our population, the 18 to 24-year-olds who've not had an opportunity, A, to build up some savings to get them through, and B, that they've got more challenges in their lives than the rest of the population. So I'm happy to bring that forward as a direct report. Even if you don't ask me, I'm going to bring it. I think it is important that your concerns are the administration's concerns, and will give you something on which to chew on and understand where both housing impacts individuals, but also on how mental health, although we do not, as you all know, deal with the health and education world, we are players in the game, and we ought to take our responsibility strongly. And therefore, I commit to you that we will have a housing and well-being report on the back of COVID, so as you can assess the situation locally, and perhaps give once again your thoughts on how we can improve that situation for our youngest and most vulnerable in society. So I just wanted to add that very quickly into your debate.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, Councillor George, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David and Jack, for a very, I think, very thought-provoking document. It really was. It really gave some, reasons for sitting there and reading it 2 or 3 times over. So it's a very, very good document from that perspective. Look, I think what I'll do is I'll try and take my comments on things which probably a little bit outside the box on this, because if we're going through section by section, I want to do that. I think looking at it, I know you're proposing this board to represent the businesses and presumably use the thoughts on that coming forward. Could I say, though, I think really what I've found and what I've been very impressed with is, particularly, I think, as Councillor Harvey mentioned, I think is a lot of the SMEs have done an excellent job of adapting themselves to the COVID situation. Some of them have changed, gone from to selling groceries, from being dentists almost, and things like that. It's been remarkable the way they've done that, and they really have changed their model. And and we've got now people working and continue to work for English businesses sitting in Romania and places like that now. It's through the internet. It's remarkable how business models have changed. And my thought process in this is really looking at this thing. I think it's very, very important we understand how people have adapted to this and really focus on how we can help them in those adaptations and help them with their new business models, because a lot of them have come up with brand new business models. So having some way we can get particularly the SMEs together, because I'm just slightly worried this board may be a lot of big people, but some way to get out there and support some of these SMEs in particular, in terms of, okay, you've changed your business model, now what do you need to move that forward? Because I think a lot of them would do an excellent job on that. And what have you. The second thing is really, I totally agree about the younger generation. This is really, really important, trying to get these people involved. Now, again, just thinking a little bit out of the box here, we've mentioned the rural economy, but tourism, it fits in very well with the carbon agenda, getting people to stay at home fundamentally for their holidays. That's the biggest thing we can do if we're trying to reduce carbon emissions, for example, and it fits in very well with their agenda. So the whole tourism industry does provide a lot of benefits or job opportunities for young people in particular, and we do have some quite nice parts of the borough, and big open spaces and what have you. So I think looking at that as something perhaps we haven't looked at in detail, it's not mentioned anywhere in the report, maybe it'd be an area, because it can give the young youth employment and also help on our carbon areas. So I've tried to cover that. I think I've listened very much to what Paul says. I totally agree, Paul Miller, and I think it's great that we're trying to move into particularly the getting BCOT and people involved. Could I say one thing that I've found in my career that gets people focused, and if you look at places around the UK, is for demonstration projects. If you can get a business and an educational establishment together and have a demonstration project. And what I particularly like is, as Councillor Miller has mentioned, we've got some big developments. We've got Betty Down, we've got other ones in the pipelines here. which we could actually put big demonstration projects together, particularly on green economy, heat pump technology, all of these things. And I really do believe there's opportunities there of coming together, bringing educational establishments together with big companies and saying, hey, look, we've got the land here, we've got the opportunities here, and possibly even putting some seed funding in ourselves to do that if that's viable, to try and move that forward. That'll help the younger generations develop the skill bases. It'll help attract people into the town, and where I've seen this happen previously in various parts of the country, it's worked extremely well. And it can even probably gain some government funding as well. So something along those lines. I think most of my other comments are very point specific, so I'll move that forward. But thanks once again for a most interesting document.
Thank you, Councillor George. And finally, before we go into the meat of the document, section by section, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, seeing as you've mentioned adult education and you've mentioned higher education, just to make a declaration of interest, I am a lecturer with the Open University, so I should declare that it's on my register of interest. But you're both talking about higher education and adult education, which is my place of work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. Okay, that is noted. Okay, so what I'd like to do is move through the report, section by section. I would like to start with the committee's indulgence at 2.3, which is business. Okay, so the second section. Okay, and then moving on very quickly to number 3, because effectively the section number 1 is basically the executive summary, and section 2 is the economic impact so far. So on people. But I would like to draw the committee's attention to the impact on the employment in Appendix A, which is quite interesting, where the unemployment rate has shot up from 0.02% to 4% in May. Okay, which is obviously quite alarming. So really, I'd like to go on from 2.3. For the back end of section 2. So has anybody got any comments on that? No? Gone. Moving on to section number 3, the Council's emergency economic response. Okay, do we have any questions on that area? Okay, Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, query to Jack and to David about what the total ask was, what that 53 million represents as a percentage of those companies we haven't supported, and how we, in the council specifically, I'm not interested in national government, we're a local government, we're a local council, I'm interested in how we, local council, and what we did, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cubitt. Jack, would you like to come in on that, please?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of specifically the grant funding that we provided, so just to go back to what was provided to us, there was 2 forms of grants initially for small businesses, and that was all done around the rateable value of their property. So having a property of a rateable value of 15,000 or less. Or there were grants for those in the retail, hospitality and leisure industries, because they've been more impacted, or initially were seen as being more impacted than other businesses. There was a lot of criteria around who we could and could not provide that funding to, so there was very little discretion from a council perspective, and actually our main job was really to distribute it as efficiently as possible. And to make sure that all those businesses who were eligible for it accessed it. And we provided that to over 1,600 businesses in the borough, either a grant of £10,000 or £25,000. And that represented 100% of the eligible businesses in the borough for that grant. There was then a secondary fund made available, the discretionary grant scheme, which, as you can tell from its name, had a slight more element of discretion, but actually still came with it a number of parameters around how it could be used to support businesses in the local area, and very much was still focused on those businesses who had a fixed premises cost, but maybe did not pay business rates directly. So really thinking about the businesses who are based in co-working spaces, or actually pay a fee directly to the landlord that incorporates both rent and rates, and they had been missed out on the initial grant funding. Through that scheme, we supported 155 businesses with just over £1 million worth of support, and they were grants that varied from £2,500 up to £10,000, depending on the scale of their fixed property costs. In terms of the ones that you ask about, sort of who's missed out, or the ones that came forward for funding but weren't supported, largely in terms of that, it's been those businesses who are based from home. They're the businesses that potentially have fallen through the cracks because they don't have the same element of paying business rates, but also they, through the discretionary grant scheme, which was focused on those with fixed property costs, i.e. those with commercial property costs, they weren't eligible for that either. So there was a number of businesses, not normally smaller businesses, as you can imagine, working from home, often sole traders or one-man bands, that were not eligible for that funding. So they're probably the ones that we could not support directly through the grant funding.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Councillor Cubitt, would you like to come back?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jack. So just to recap, of the 53 million, 1 million was the discretionary, which supported 155 companies, which would suggest that 52 million represented the non-discretionary support to leisure and restaurant. We had 100% hit rate on that. Did central government identify those companies, or did we have to identify them? And how many companies benefited from the 52 million?
So the 52 million is the overall figure for both. Sorry, what I did not mention before was there's also an element of business rates relief. So a number of businesses were supported through not having to pay business rates for 2020 to 2021 up until the end of the financial year in March 21. And that actually incorporates about roughly 30 million pounds worth of that support. So it was effectively 20 million pounds worth of direct grants given out to businesses. We were given the parameters in terms of who had to support, and we, through our own business rates list, identified the businesses that we felt to be eligible. But of course, we promoted the scheme widely and ensured that businesses who maybe we didn't identify originally could come forward and make a claim. All claims were then reviewed through the business rates team to support. So we got to 100% of those that we believe to be eligible, either through the small business grant scheme or the retail, hospitality and leisure scheme.
Great, thank you very much, Jack. Okay, so moving on to section number 4. Anybody? Jack, would you like to come in first?
Sorry, that's a rogue hand from.
Okay, no worries. Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to 4.2 in the first bullet point. And again, it's the words, I guess, but the inference is perhaps on a direction we would take. I would delete the words whenever possible. If we're going to put the green agenda seriously and tackle climate change, it shouldn't be whenever it's possible. It should be a definitive, definite action that fundamentally underwrites the strategy, that we will put climate change and green policies at the heart of our economic strategy. And it shouldn't be a whenever we can. it needs to be there as an underwritten fundamental, I think. So I appreciate that may be there just as an aside, but nonetheless, it shouldn't be there at all if we can make that a priority.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Conesco, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of comments throughout section 4, some of the subsections there. So maybe I'll start, if I start off with 4.4, then you can decide, Chair, whether you want me to crack on or whether anyone else wants to chip in. But section 4.4 around clean growth, I think it was Councillor Miller mentioned earlier that one of the really positive things about the report was it had this focus on the next 12 months. And section 4.4 seemed to be missing that. It was the only section that didn't have any clear action points for the next year. So I would like to potentially suggest some areas to think about. And clean growth, this is talking about obviously the climate emergency and ways of reducing our carbon footprint. And it seemed like getting cracking with council properties, not just the council offices themselves, but other properties, commercial and residential, that the council owns would be a great start to this, and looking at making them carbon neutral or carbon positive even. And I think additionally, this sort of ties into what we were talking before about jobs and skills, namely on the to one extreme, we could act as a broker, as a number of councillors have said, working with educational providers, working with the construction industry to train people to actually come in and do this work, which we would fund as the ultimate client. But I think there's also an opportunity to be a bit more ambitious here. So could we actually train and hire our own in-house team, which would be responsible for making green energy changes around the council's broader portfolio? And then could we actually expand that to look at other projects? I think Councillor George talked about Manydown as an example. So once we've trained these people up, once we've gone through our portfolio, which is quite extensive, I'm sure will take a while, there are other projects in the future that we can take on, and then potentially we can look at going out to other private sector sites and actually using this as part of a revenue generating initiative. So working with the education sector to actually come up with potentially a revenue generating source of income that helps transform our portfolio and also help to improve the carbon efficiency of other buildings in Basingstoke. So that was my point around sort of 4.4. Do you want me to continue, Chair, or
I would like to give someone else a quick shout. Fine. I'll come back to you.
I will leave it there.
Okay, I will come back to you, Councillor Conesco, don't worry. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to mirror that in lots of ways, I think certainly the idea of building the green economy and what have you on chapter 4.4 is very, very important. But I think we need to recognise a lot of this is to some degree going to be restricted by the planning regimes we have in this country and the ability to actually do some of these things, particularly on new housing going forward, until the local plan has been changed and we have suitable, and the government has changed some of these legislation. I think it's going to be very, very difficult. But I also think that, if we're talking about water and water resources and things like that, that's, again, it's something that's a little out of our control. And I just wondered, how can we influence the utility companies, the water companies? The reality is that, if we drive an electric car, we're still going to be using electricity, which is generated primarily by gas, and this is the issue we have. It's a bit of a problem. Unless we actually proactively start generating electricity ourselves, it's going to be very, very difficult to change that. So I suppose my point here is lots of ways is a lot of this relies on us working with the governments, with utilities, with lots of other people to try and improve this. And I think it's a matter of influence, really, to get there. And that's a long-term thing. I'm just wondering what we could do in the short term to try and take it forward. That's the point there.
Thank you, Councillor George. I've got Councillor Harvey, please.
Is it on mute? There we go. No, thank you, Chair. I mean, again, it comes down to where we put the heart of this, and I agree with both comments that have been passed so far, really. I mean, that diagram that's on page 30, I mean, this should read, shouldn't it, the green economic recovery, and each one of those hubs, each one of those sections should directly address how we as a local authority can influence both the private and public sectors in a very good relationship in our using our powers to broker and grow and support each of those areas to deliver the green agenda we want. And you're right about the planning side of things. I mean, if the government gets its way and we see localism destroyed, if everything is centralised now into what dear old Dominic Cummings wants to do from number 10 and take away the planning powers from local planning authorities, then that would be a very sad day, I think, for localism, and a very sad day, because I actually that was one of the most important things, you know, going back to the early days of the Conservative government, what they did do right was bringing in localism, and that was a good thing. So in that context, before we lose localism, using our economic strategy, which I presume is where this fits, using our local plan when we redevelop it with Mark and what the work that his officers are doing with us, and it overlaps, doesn't it? And if it doesn't overlap, then it should. So in that sense, I think it needs to be underwritten throughout. Everything that this plan speaks about should be driving the carbon footprint further down and doing something towards climate change, so that the jobs are secure going forward and businesses are secure going forward, and they are enabled to make their contribution to a cleaner and greener environment and to tackling climate change. It shouldn't be any more difficult than that, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Canesco, I'll come back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just moving on to section 4.5 and specifically section 4.5.4, where we look at the actions for the next 12 months around jobs and skills. I was just going to ask whether Jack and David had also considered some sort of mentoring scheme there as a way of tackling some of these issues, particularly for that sort of younger 18 to 25-year-old population that we've all been that we've highlighted a little bit earlier on today. It's a scheme that organisations such as the Prince's Trust use very successfully, particularly to support people in sort of lower income families that might not have access to resources or role models, perhaps. So something to consider there. And I think also on the flip side, obviously you have people who need to be mentored, but on the other hand, you need the mentors to help them. And perhaps one of the positives that has come out of the lockdown and everything that's happened to us over the past 6 months has been that sort of rise in the community spirit. We've all seen various local and national groups set up with driven by volunteers and driven by public goodwill. So maybe this is a way of tapping into that to draw in volunteer mentors who can help, particularly the 18 to 25-year-olds, with the range of options and help them with some of the challenges that they're facing trying to get back to work or set up their own businesses.
Thank you, Councillor Canesco. Jack, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to reassure councillors that definitely mentoring will be an aspect of the planned youth hub. I think you're right in terms of that, building on the success that we've had in recent months around how people are responding to the needs of the local community and focusing in on that more. We should try and work with the momentum that's been building. I think there are a number of partners we're looking to bring into the youth hub, such as Basingstoke Consortium, BVA, Incu Hive, our business support organisation, who do mentoring or do a form of mentoring, or at least also have access to mentoring networks. So they will play a key role in terms of that work. If I could also, just whilst I'm speaking, if I just talking about the clean growth element, I just wanted to say there was mention around why was there not sort of 12-month action plan underneath that section. I think part of that is because we do not want to preempt what's going to come out of the climate strategy, the air quality strategy, and we want to make sure that very much anything that we do as part of this it reflects sort of the priorities of that strategy, which obviously is going to be coming out, I believe, consultation later in the autumn. So I think there are things that there are opportunities that maybe we could put down, but what I didn't want to do is set out a number of priorities that actually would go against what will be agreed in future months.
Thank you, Jack. Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I come from a completely different perspective to Councillor Harvey and Councillor Konescu. And whilst I believe that it's good to have an eye on improving environmental issues, I think that the world that we now live in today is very different from the world that we lived in pre-COVID. And the whole point of this paper is to talk about economic recovery framework. And I made a reference at the very beginning to the reality, which is that we, the local government, we don't create jobs. The only thing that we as a borough council have to do is we have to enable and make Basingstoke Borough a borough where companies want to come because we facilitate an easier journey for them, right? So the last thing we need to do is to have compulsory, extreme requirements imposed upon any potential employer, because ultimately our interests must lie and align with our residents. So I'm afraid that I don't agree with Councillor Harvey in the removal of the sentence "whenever possible," because my whole premise, obviously it's not about me per se, but the whole purpose of this debate is how do we enable our private sector to have as easier a time as possible in tricky times, and that means making it easier for them to employ people, making it easier for them to find employees with the right skills. It means making them have car parking spaces. Jack and I visited a couple of companies who are planning to leave Basingstoke because they don't have enough car parking spaces. These are big companies, right? Now, if Councillor Harvey and Councillor Konescu have their way, we won't have any car parks at all, because we'll be telling these big employees, employers, that they can't have any parking spaces because we're looking for a clean growth agenda. And I'm sorry, there's a major clash of agendas, because the world we inhabited pre-COVID was one where we could have nice conversations about all of these wonderful things. Actually, we're talking about survival, and we're talking about the benefits of our residents. So I'm sorry, I don't agree with either Councillor Harvey or Councillor Konescu, and I don't want to impose appalling requirements on our employers at this juncture. I want us to help them to grow and help them to employ as many people as possible. And the planning system is a classic case in point. I mean, every time I've been involved with development control, we impose ridiculous requirements of one-off planning applications, which represent additional costs of £10,000. They're ostensibly an additional tax. And we've got to be looking at ways that make things cheaper and easier, not more difficult. We've got to look at ways to make Festival Place successful. And we've got to look at ways of providing major employers with car parking spaces so they actually want to be in Basingstoke and they don't want to go to Reading.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. I've got Councillor George next, and then I've got Councillor James, then Councillor Harvey, you'll then have right of reply.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, looking at this, I suppose there's one thing that we are talking about here, which is education, training, jobs for the younger generation, and the spectre of unemployment. Can I just raise one issue, which is, could we put in here something about working, particularly with the law enforcement agencies, to ensure that as the unemployment rises, we don't get our younger generation diverted into, should we say, county lines and things like that, and we lose them from the economic, we lose the economic benefit of their future. I think it's an important point, because as crime rises, particularly in the younger generation, I can see these people being attracted in other directions. So it's just a point, but I think it's perhaps something we ought to consider.
Thank you, Councillor George. Councillor James, please.
Thank you. If we think that we've got a crisis now in relation to COVID, we've all signed up to, as a council, the climate change emergency, we can't ignore it, and it's there, you know, that we've identified that we have got an emergency. So this strategy that we're looking at now, although that we are facing the crisis that we're in because of COVID, we have to recognise that climate change is going to have an absolutely significant impact on us. If we think this has had an impact, what is the climate change going to do? So I think it does need to underpin it, and we need to think differently. But I think that part of this, and I think that one of the things that this report maybe doesn't do, is to reference that, is the impact that COVID may have had on the climate change agenda, and we need to have that discussion, and that needs to take place. But I don't think we should shy away from what we have all signed up to. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we need to be innovative and find solutions for businesses. But our commitment is to, and we have recognised that there is a climate change emergency, and we can't, we can't move away from that. But if there are companies that are leaving this town because they haven't got car parks, what is it that we can do to support them? And but I think it's, we can't ignore it, but we need to look at, initially, I'm sure that COVID has had a significant impact on the climate change agenda, and we need to have that discussion as part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. I did have Councillor Harvey's hand up electronically for a right of reply. Okay, Councillor Harvey, do you no longer wish for that to happen?
No, I'm happy to say, we're talking about the 18 to 24-year-old age group, and if you talk to younger people, one of the critical issues for them is climate change. And if we of our generations don't take it seriously, all we are doing is piling the misery on them in their generations when they get to our age. All we're doing is loading it up for them to have to deal with later in life. So unless our strategies today take climate change seriously, and of course our economic strategy has a part to play in that, if we have an opportunity to reshape our local economy by working in partnership with our business community, by working in partnership with education, by working in partnership with the public sector, why would we not take that? Why would we not want to engage with the younger people to say, these are the sorts of jobs, the sorts of businesses? We want them to be entrepreneurs setting up small businesses in the future. We want them to be the people that drive the economy for us in the future. And unless we actually deal with the issues they care about, of which number one before COVID was climate change, all we're doing is putting our heads in the sand, and we'll never deal with it. So we do need to take it seriously. And I think when we admitted we had a climate change emergency, we made that first step. I think the climate change action plan that the Cabinet are considering is a very important step along the way. The work that Mark and the officers are doing around the local plan is another step along the way. And this strategy can be a further step along the way when we bring the economy there too. And I think there's so much more we need to be talking about than just this. I get that. I've got no issue with that. Talking about how we develop business space. What is it, the future shape of business? What is the future needs of offices? The future shape of working from home? The technological, the skills, the jobs and associated elements that go with that. We've got sections to talk about, but just on the climate change thing, if this doesn't underpin an economic strategy, we are stacking the deck for that future generation. And I don't want to be that. I want to be somebody that takes it seriously here and now and writes it into our policies. Otherwise, we aren't taking their concerns seriously. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Konesko.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that as well, in that I think that the two can be complementary. I don't think pursuing a green agenda and trying to regenerate the economy, trying to kickstart the economy after COVID are opposite strategies. I think they can work together, and I think there are plenty of examples, such as, for example, looking at ways of making buildings more energy efficient, which demonstrate that they create jobs, and also they create savings for the landlords and the tenants, which will be recouped over the many years. So to give the example that Councillor Cubitt said, I'm not talking here about removing car parking spaces from employers, but what I am saying is let's look at investing in electric car parking spaces so that if employees want to come buy electric car, they can do so because there's somewhere for them to park at the end of the day, and they can come back with a charged vehicle. I'm not saying let's mandate incredibly high and restrictive building standards on existing buildings to make them more energy efficient, but let's promote energy efficiency as a way of reducing costs in the longer term that will offset the initial outlay of the investment to create them, and will also create jobs at the same time. So I think these are complementary strategies rather than ones that oppose each other. Just a couple of other points, if I may, Chair, just relating to some of the sections in section 4. Section 4.6, specifically paragraph 4.6.3, we've got some examples of support that we could provide, such as debt recovery, financial planning, change management. I'd also like to suggest there that we can use our contacts book that we've got. I think a few councillors have mentioned that we are excellent as brokers, and I think we could be doing that as a sort of brokerage service, putting people in touch with each other. And also, I think grant funding advice. I've certainly been contacted by a lot of my constituents over the past few months about the various funds that are available. There's so many government schemes at the moment, some predating COVID, and I think a lot of the public find it incredibly confusing. So we've got the expertise, we understand this, so I think that will be a useful sort of skill to pass on. We talk as well in the bullet points in the 12 next month focus about exploring the use of community assets, such as community centres, to deliver a wider range of services, including space for startups. Could we also consider some of our council properties, not necessarily to council offices, but other council-owned properties, particularly any properties that are currently vacant? Skipping forward to section 4.8.1, we talk about delivery of full fibre to the premises from Openreach. So this is about having fast broadband, fast mobile internet access as well, I presume, to premises. Can we just also make that clear, because it wasn't clear to me, that should include residential premises, with people increasingly working from home, having access to mobile phone, good mobile phone access, and having access to broadband at home becomes more important than ever. And I know, certainly having sort of been on holiday in Cornwall last month, there are parts of that county which are very poorly served by broadband and by mobile access, and there are certainly government schemes to help encourage that, improving an investment in that, and I'm not sure to what extent we could tap into those as well. And then my final point, you'll be delighted to know on this, is on section 4.10.5, where we're talking about, that's the final point there, about exploring opportunities for e-bikes and e-scooters, which I think is great. Electric vehicle charging points, which we just discussed, is in there as well. I think it would also make sense to see if we can talk to the county council about improving bus services, because that is increasingly an important way of getting around for people, particularly in the sort of 18 to 25 bracket. Ownership of cars is in that age group is lower than it was when I think we were that age. So alternatives, great. E-bikes, e-scooters, yes. Electric vehicles, brilliant, but let's not forget the slightly more old-fashioned, but nonetheless still very useful bus network that we have as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Konieski. I have the next one hand up for Honorary Cubitt, please.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm on 4.9 commercial property and housing. Jack and David, we are aware of some high-profile names that moved their offices out of the City of London before lockdown because of how they perceived they were going to run their business. And I just wondered what we are doing with regards to supporting those companies and encouraging them to stay in Basingstoke, because they're very high-profile service banking industries. Specifically also, did we get involved with supporting them on transport from the railway station to, in some instances, to places like Viables?
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just going through section 4 then and raising points.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, that was a question to Jack or to David.
I beg your pardon. Okay. Would you like to come back and respond before we then move to Councillor Harvey?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, Councillor Cubitt, you're specifically referring there to JP Morgan and movement of some staff into the data centre that they hold in the Viables Centre. The move itself was not something at the time of happening that we were aware of, but of course, as soon as we did become aware of that, we made contact with the company through working with the Department for International Trade account manager, and we continue to explore whether they intend to sort of continue that kind of operation or indeed expand an operation where they have people working outside of central London location as they look to reduce their footprint in the city. So that is something we are actively pursuing, although it should be noted that they have made some public announcements around the fact that actually they feel more comfortable with people working from home, and that actually that this period has shown that some of the jobs that they expected could only be done from a physical space like a data center could actually be fulfilled from home. So although we will work with them, that is not, there's no guarantee there about further expansion. But the wider point there is, yes, we need to promote Basingstoke as a great place for what's called the hub and spoke model, where you might have a smaller footprint in London, but greater space closer to where the majority of where your staff live. And we will be actively pursuing opportunities to showcase Basingstoke in the right light in terms of that. I think one of the challenges will be about ensuring that we have the right kind of space for businesses at the right time, because we obviously have to, there'll be a lot of businesses will be wanting to move in, and we need to make sure that we've got the right fit in terms of grade A office space, and that needs to be more readily available for businesses, whether that's in Basingview, Chinham, Viables, or wherever.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, Jack, for that comprehensive answer. I just park with you the comment I made about getting those guys at short notice from the station to Viables, and that is very relevant to any of the narrative that you're going to be talking with whomever the financial sectors are, or whomever wishes to move some of more of their back office activities out to places like Basingstoke, because at the moment, as we all know, there's no connectivity at all to be worth mentioning. It's absolutely essential, and we always talk, and we're coming to that section in a minute. We always talk a great talk, but I never, not in all the years that I've been here, ever seen anything remotely tangible, so that if I was running a huge company and I was looking at Basingstoke, I'd say, well, okay, great, I've got a great space in Viables, but how do I get my staff from the railway station to Viables? And that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing, because most of the time we spend in meetings like this talking about things that we can't do anything about. But actually, all we should be doing is facilitating and making it easier for bigger companies to come to us. And that is a #1 priority that we should be working out, how to get people from the railway station to Viables, Basingview and Chinham. And if we crack that, it's a bit like the how to get draft Guinness out of a can. It's probably the most important thing, and it's the only thing we should be focusing on.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Okay, just before we go into Councillor Harvey, I would like to put a question to Jack about section 4.12.7. Okay, in the bullet points, you mentioned the top of town and exploring the ways with the bid. Okay, to reinvigorate the top of town. But what I'd like to know is, what support do you envisage? Okay, for businesses in the centre of town, in the bid area, to actually pay for the cost of the bid?
if I could take Councillor Cubitt's point first, just around that connectivity to viables. I don't think I'm wrong in stating that there is a bus that I believe is funded by Sony and Fujitsu in terms of that connectivity to viables. And there's obviously the service that goes directly to Chinham Business Park. So there are options there for people to have that transport to those areas. In terms of support for the bid, the council forward funded the bid, significant proportion of its levy funding this year to enable it to survive, to carry on. But of course, the bid then did need to introduce the levy for local businesses to pay. The smallest continue to not pay, those with a rateable value of under 10,000, I believe. And it's done on a proportionate scale of your rateable value beyond that. We feel that those services are important for those local businesses, and in terms of the training that's provided, the range of service, the sort of promotional support that the bid provides.
Can I just stop there, because my question was quite targeted. I understand that businesses will pay the bid for the bid, okay, if they can afford it. What plans, thoughts, processes do you have for when businesses turn around and can't afford it? So they can't afford to pay for the bid. What happens then? Do we support the bid ourselves, or is there support for businesses to help them fund the bid, or what vehicle do you see?
Yeah, so that was the reason for the forward funding for the bid of 85,000 of their fund for this financial year, to support them to be able to go ahead, because we recognise that a number of businesses will not be paying their levy throughout this year. So to enable the bid to survive, the council has taken that decision to do that. Going forward, whether there'll be enforcement activity on businesses who can't pay, how do we support those that can't pay? That's something that we should definitely look to explore. And of course, we are coming up to a reballot year for the bid, so it will be up to local businesses to decide whether they see enough value in the funding that they're providing to continue that service.
Right, thank you. Okay, moving back, Councillor Harvey, you were next with your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that transport point, I guess one of the biggest issues we're going to face is giving people the confidence to get back on public transport. And it is an issue, and it is about the change of modal shift, getting people out of their car and back into the trains and the buses. And I will hold my hands up. I am equally as anxious at getting on a train and going to London as people are getting on a train going from London coming to Basingstoke. And in the context of that, how we encourage people to go back into work and feel safe in offices or feel safe in work is equally an issue. So all of these things are very finely balanced, and the climate change impact of that is relevant because people feel safer driving in their car because it's hermetically sealed from A to B, because it's safer in the current circumstances, and we have to deal with that. So when we're talking about a mass rapid transit system or buses that link our business parks together, I think there is a very delicate and difficult, issue to overcome there, and I think it's one we need to think very carefully about. Going through the paper, if I may, Chair, briefly just raise a few points. In section 4.6, and also really with the commercial property section, I think when we talk about the way offices are going to work and the way that businesses are tackling bringing their workforces back, how we deal with flexible working, how you enable space, and I think space is a very important word in all of this, so that businesses may have a certain amount of their workforce in on a Monday and a different part of their workforce in on a Tuesday, so they can maintain distancing, so that they can protect themselves in the context of the risks that they have to take on as employers, and it can be done safely and properly is really important. So flexible working, you can't hot desk. because the employees are responsible for cleaning their desk. They have to be safe at their desk. So hot desking is a real issue for so many businesses because it is such a difficult one to deal with a risk assessment of bringing people back. How do we support them with the office space we have, with the flexibility of costs involved in that as well, to help them get their businesses back on track? I think there's a real conundrum there in terms of design, and we can be innovative in what we're doing on Basing View, but we've also got some old buildings to think about as well. And I think it's also about how those businesses maintain their cash flow, like I said earlier, maintain their costs immediately in rent or other things, so they can go back into an office, so they can get themselves back on their feet again. And that's a really important point that needs to be considered throughout the paper. I think there is an issue about community centres being considered as places where you would have start-up businesses. I think community centres as places where you would see support for business as an outreach or business support services delivered is one thing, but actually asking a community centre to support business startups with space is far more problematic. And I think that could be a difficult one for us to think about and consider. The other bit that's written throughout this report, Chair, in section 4.7, and it goes on in terms of the relationship with the town centre throughout the paper, is just where we are with some of our own strategies here. If we're focusing on the health of the town centre, we're talking about Festival Place and we're talking about the town centre, then we need to be very careful when we start using language, and I'll go to 4.12.5, when in the middle of the paragraph we say, ensure that the main town centre. Well, what do we mean by the main town centre? Are we suddenly elevating the leisure park to be part of our town centre? Because it isn't. It is an out of town centre retail park. And it would be a mistake to try and level it as competing against our town centre. So again, it's just, we need to be really careful what we put in this paper as to what might be, maybe that's a Freudian slip, or maybe I'm reading too much into it and I shouldn't. But it's one that we need to be careful with. And the threat of the leisure park is real. If we have a retail sector problem, and we do, and we're going to develop the leisure park into a significant retail centre, then the competition it will give to Festival Place, we've already said it before COVID. Now, after COVID, it's going to be significant and really serious. So again, we just need to rethink what we would promote as a council, as we might want on the leisure park, that might then kill our town centre even more than it already is hurting. It'd be stupid for us to do that. So I just think we've got to be careful with some of this. In terms of the design and space stuff, when we talk about bringing JLL in to do an assessment of our commercial property, I think that's really good. But again, this brings up the localism point. If we're suddenly going to get lots of people doing permitted development for office conversions or do permitted development in our town centre, and we're not in control of that, or the LPA doesn't have a role in that because the government's walked off with our planning powers, that's quite serious. So are we actually, not just on this paper, but are we contributing to a consultation response to the white paper by saying, actually, because of COVID and because of our economic strategy, we want to keep localism, we want to stay in control of our planning powers so that we can shape our town centre going forward and we can shape our economy going forward? I would hope we are. I don't know whether we are on that. Can I really endorse what Ken said about 4.74 and local chains and local supply chains? I think that's a really important point, and that could be a really good point for diversification of the economy as well, promoting those local supply chains. And that would benefit what Annalise spoke about in terms of businesses coming out of London and being able to locate to Basingstoke, knowing that they had local supply chains that supported them in their businesses here in Basingstoke. That's really important. And then finally, in terms of promotion, just to say in terms of the local economy nationally and regionally, it's not just about glossy brochures and the rest of it. I'm just wondering what more we could do to promote Basingstoke as a place to do business, where they want to do business. And that brings you to your 5G hub. And I know Ken mentioned it, but if we're going to see more home working now, the importance of that network to homes, for example, on Manydown, or example, on other developments, it's not just about the business centres, it's also about those people working from home and having really good connections to the internet that would then enable them to work from home in a sustainable way, rather than having a Zoom meeting where your audio doesn't work or your video gives out, you're banging your head against a brick wall because the client you're in front of actually can't hear you. Those sorts of things really matter, I think, going forward. there's lots in this paper. You've got so much in it, and I know it's just a start. And I know we're commenting all over the place. So I hope it's helpful in that regard, and you might bring it back to us when you've had a better thought about how it could be developed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Waldridge, please.
Thank you. There's just one point I really wanted to emphasise, and expanding on what I said earlier, and expanding on Councillor Andy Koneshko's point as well about mentoring. I just don't, particularly in relation to young people who are sort of looking for their first job, or haven't had much experience, so haven't got a lot to put on CVs and haven't had a lot of interviews, but also, just as importantly, older people who may have been in the same job for years and years, but just now have faced redundancy, and they've had no interview practice, no practice of writing CVs and all of that. I just don't want to lose the fact that we need something in this report to which provides those softer skills for those people who are really going to need them, whether it be online training or sort of face-to-face training, ideally face-to-face training. I mean, there is an absence of affordable careers guidance in the town and nationally now, and it's really missing from this report, and I just didn't want to lose it from this paper. So that's, I could say other things, but that's the one thing I just want to really home in on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would echo that what Councillor Waldridge just said. I have a 21-year-old son who's just lost his job again. Spent last evening helping him out with his CV. So any help with soft skills like that would be greatly appreciated. So generally tonight I've agreed with what everybody has said, apart from Councillor Onley. I don't believe in deregulating the market just to suit employers, ignoring our climate responsibilities. When we talk about supporting communities, I think what we need to do is support our community centres. As we all know, throughout this COVID crisis, they were at the fore where the volunteers went and looked after the most vulnerable in our community. These community centres have had no income for 6 months now. And I'll take the West Side one, where they furloughed most of their staff. And that furlough scheme is coming to an end now, but they've still got no income coming in. So what we're talking about is a minimum of 30 people. Like the West Side was 99% at volume before COVID. So they're having a real crisis now where they'll be laying off their own staff now. So these are council buildings. So the council has a responsibility there, and that crisis is coming very soon now with our community centres. And I would like to see something in this paper around that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up the bit about Caroline mentioned. I agree that we need to upskill individuals if they fall out of employment or move to self-employment, and to reskill, because obviously there will not just be the younger element of our society, but obviously the older element who will feel just as anxious not having a job as the young, and we need to make sure that we facilitate that. And I'm quite happy that we get involved with BCOT or QMC to run evening classes to facilitate the soft skill element of getting back into the workforce, and I'm happy to move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Councillor James, please.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Councillor Watts and Councillor Harvey said about community centres. My concern is in a later section on place shaping, it talks about community resilience, and really I think this is the only time that community centres are mentioned in the report. But I wouldn't want to see them being sort of siphoned off to be used for startups. I don't think that's what they're about. I think there's so much more that we could use community centres for, and we need to look at that and explore the opportunities. But I don't want us to be using the buildings for startups. I think that would be detrimental to place shaping. I think that's we need to look at what else we should be using community centres for, to support vulnerable people, for supporting training. There's so much more that we could do. So I don't want us to do that. But I also, like Gary, am concerned about those centres that the staff are furloughed. We've got until October, and they've got to wash their own face by then. What are we going to do to support those buildings? How many of the community centres are up and running? How many are empty? What are they? What capacity are they working to at the moment? So I just think really that's an area that we really need to focus on. But also the third sector in relation to the charity sector. We haven't really made much mention within the paper about the charity sector and the third sector. And I think, and the voluntary sector, we need to be having a look at that in relation to this economic strategy. And just going over the page on to 4.10.5, I think it was mentioned by others, but I really think that there needs to be a great deal more looked at in relation to public transport. I think that whole area is very weak, and we need to be looking at buses. I guess when the leisure park comes along, we're going to be losing the park and ride. And at the moment, particularly in relation to COVID, people, like Paul has said, feel safe within their buses. But what do the buses look like in the future? You know, what is it going to look like? And how do we encourage people back onto buses? What's the whole, the whole aspect of public transport going to look like? And I just think that area needs to be beefed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Okay, I've got David Coval has got his hand up. So if you'd like to give us the benefit of your insights, please, David.
Thank you, Chair. It's simply on the issue of community centres. I think the idea of startups is in there as an idea. It's not a proposal. There's no recommendation in there. It's something to be considered, and there are certainly pros and cons. So that's something to look at. And I think we, in a separate environment, we're extremely aware of the situation of community centres. Another part of my team is in literally daily contact with them, as our BVA. As you know, as a mainstay of support. I think the economic strategy is perhaps not the right place to focus on community centres, community grids. Not that they're not equally important, but as we've said on about the prioritisation of the economic strategy, if that is really then becomes about wider issues to do with the use of community centres, I think it would just be a maybe not the right forum to address those very important issues.
Thank you, David. Okay, I'd like Councillor George, please.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at all this, I think, clearly we're in a position where this is a great plan, or, certainly framework for a plan for recovery. There will be a number of things actually going forward which may in fact change what we're trying to achieve here in lots of ways, or what we need to achieve. Clearly we do need recovery, but clearly, the availability of vaccine and the vaccination will certainly change people's perceptions, and will change the whole issues about transportation, and probably change the way that businesses need to think to recover. I'm just worried. I know people are maybe very skeptical about this, but there's a lot of talk now about maybe vaccines being available by Christmas, and lots of people being trained to administer these and what have you. I think looking at this, some recognition here that there may be a game change at some point here, and that we may need to not as necessarily rethink, but perhaps adjust the strategies, or certainly the way we support people, you know, under different scenarios may be an important thing here. You know, I'm all hoping that this does in fact happen, that we all get vaccinated, and I won't say it's business as usual, because it's not, because clearly, you know, a lot has happened to businesses, but some recognition of changes and different scenarios going forward, I think, may be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor George. Councillor Court, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just a little bit concerned about some of the comments that were made about community centres. We've been heavily involved here locally in a couple of the community care centres, and maybe it's not common knowledge, but they did all receive quite a large grant to help them over this current period from the council in view of the loss of earnings. Moving on to that, I think we have to be a little bit cautious about how much commitment we put to community centres, because again, those two centres that I'm particularly involved with, both their bookings are taking off now that groups are starting to return. And those are groups that you might consider to be some of the more vulnerable people that are going for green therapy, keep fit, and just socialising generally. So I think a little bit of caution. They are starting to make money. And if you start looking at using them for other things, I think we have to be a bit careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Court. Okay, Councillor Laura James, please.
Thank you. Just picking up on.
Hello, Councillor James, you're still muted. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Picking up on what the officer was saying about community centres, David, I was just, I think there is a place for community centres, a role for them to play within the economic strategy. I'm a chair of the Hall for All, and I see there would be an opportunity for training and the issue of supporting young people with skills and learning within those environments. So I think that we could look at that, and working with the most vulnerable in those communities in relation to supporting them back into work. So I don't see that's where we would look at startups, but I do think that they could play a role in supporting this economic strategy. But the other thing I also wanted to pick up on is I think we could use community buildings that we own as well, like offices that maybe at the moment are empty, but also the civic offices. You know, there are floors within this buildings that maybe we need to think about. Possibly that could be a startup, you know, and we could look at how we might use some of that space going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Okay, does anybody else have any more comments on section 4, or can we move to section 5? Gone. Okay, thank you very much, committee. Let's move on to section 5, please. Long-term projects to support economic growth. Questions, comments? Nothing there. Okay, shall we move to section number 6, please? The funding. Oh, sorry, Councillor James.
So just going back to 4.12.7.
Oh, okay.
When we're talking about arts and cultures, I think the one thing that this strategy needs to do is we need to map what is being funded within this borough. It's always been a piece of work that we've talked about doing. What organisations do we fund? Do they get in relation to their rents, in relation to grants? And I think it's a bit hit and miss, and all different organisations are getting different pots of money. And if we're looking at this as a partnership approach, what is HCC funding? So, for example, what money is it giving the Anvil? What money is it giving the museums? And we need to have a clear understanding going forward as part of this economic strategy where the funding is going for these areas.
Thank you, Councillor James. I agree with you that maybe we need to look at where our funding okay, is going, and I agree that that should be mapped out. I'm not necessarily so sure about HCC, because I'm not sure we'll be able to get the information, or at least be accurate about it. But I certainly think we need to know where our money's going, okay, and kind of move it on there. So I see that as being a first step. So what I've got next is Councillor David George, then Councillor Cubitt, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just make a comment on section 5, if I may, very quickly.
Yes, please.
Looking at this, I think there was a trend anyway prior to COVID, which is really to moving more to online shopping, less retail and things like that. And I'm just wondering whether we as a council ought to get involved in more looking at more development, which basically involves warehousing and distribution and things like that, so that as jobs move out of the retail sector and what have you, we move into the online sector in more ways. And it's just a thought actually to pop in there, and whether we should be looking at that as a balancing act, because I don't think that trend is, the COVID has pushed it much more in that direction, much more online sales, unless, you know, going into the shops and buying things. But is that something we should respond to?
Thank you, Councillor George. Okay, Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yeah, two things on long-term projects to support economic growth. I've talked about this a lot before, but I think it's relevant to this section too. Is this huge American company that has district heat, and it converts it from huge leisure parks or ice skating rinks or big shopping centres, and then it converts the heat that it's taken out of the air conditioning units and it pumps it into new housing developments. And it would be amazing if we could be at the forefront of that, especially given the fact we're talking about these enormous warehouses down Junction 7. We're talking about many down, we're talking about a new hospital, we're talking about a leisure park. So in terms of longer term projects to support economic growth, if integral to that, it's district heating systems, whereby we, and that kind of hooks in, not in a negative way, and in a detracting from the private sector thriving, but actually it works in a positive way, so that hooks into the climate narrative, which I'm not, by the way, and have not meant to denigrate. I'm just saying that life is about balancing risks, and at the moment the risks that we need to be focusing on are the jobs for the young. We're not in that kind of nice, comfortable environment where we can talk about the nice to haves, because there are the must haves. And it's the same with getting on a bus or a train. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I've asked about this before, Jack, and I'd like to hear your views on this. And this is in connection with section 5 again, is could we have an area which was a business rate enterprise free zone? Because I know that certainly the government's been talking about that. Obviously not specifically down in our neck of the woods, it's been more mooted in the north of England to encourage employment there. But I mean, is that something we should be thinking about in Basingstoke? Trying to make it the most attractive place for a company coming out of London to site their offices, because we'll have a nice friendly tax environment. Can we do that?
Jack, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I mean, just to come back directly on that point about enterprise zones, I mean, I'm sure many of you are aware that a large chunk of Basingview already is an enterprise zone, enabling businesses to have rates relief of up to 275,000 over a 5-year period. In my view, given that that already exists in the borough, it's unlikely that we'll be given the freedom or opportunity to have another area in the borough that would be an enterprise zone. But it's always worth having these sort of conversations and trying to push our agenda at a national level. But yeah, I think we need to make the most of the freedoms that we do have in terms of Basingview, and make sure we're promoting that effectively, so businesses are aware of that funding relief that they get there.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cubitt, do you want to come back on that?
No, that's great. I mean, I would just love all of our business centres, because that would be the optimal, wouldn't it, for our borough? And I would like to think big in terms of heat transfers from these huge warehouses, the leisure park, and I would like to think big in terms of making us the ultimate destination for a private company, so that we're not on their back, we're not telling them how to run their business, we don't need to get involved with telling them how to run a flexible hot desking, but we want to give them a cheap area to have their business operation, and we want to provide them with car parking space so they're happy to come in every day.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up two of the bullet points quickly. On the leisure park redevelopment, I think the words complementary and additionality are very important. And I just want to emphasise the importance of our current local plan policy, SS9, in regard to that. I think that's an incredibly important policy, and it's one that we should see continued into the new local plan. And on the basis of this strategy, it should reflect that. And in terms of the hospital, it's interesting the language we're using here, and I get it. But when we say we secure a new hospital for the area, my focus is on Basingstoke-on-Deane, and I want to see the new hospital in Basingstoke-on-Deane. I don't want it going anywhere else. I want it in our borough. So from that perspective, you know, making a clear indication of how important it is to us economically to have the hospital in our borough is incredible. It's important to so many people. I know that's part of the consultation exercise they're undertaking. And I know we've been clear, a few of us, in terms of expressing our views and how we feel about it. So yeah, I get why we're using the language and we're being very diplomatic, and I totally respect that. But being perhaps a little freer than the leader might be able to be, I appreciate why you might not be able to. But saying clearly, we want the hospital in Basingstoke-on-Deane, because not only the jobs, but also all of the health benefits that come from that for our communities.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Rattigan, please.
Councillor Harvey, on that particular point, trust me that we are, every day that goes by, we are in discussions to make sure that the location of the hospital is within the borough. We are doing everything we can actively to encourage the CCG and the Hospital Trust to position us as their main choice, whether it's in the current site or other sites within the borough, to make sure that we get that facility. And we are aware that there are not just the benefits of the jobs, but of course the expanding health world that is part of the COVID crisis, as healthcare looks like it's going to receive more money in the future, and the additional benefits of companies joining that world to redouble the money that gets spent on a hospital. We can ensure perhaps things like a medical city, health areas, science parks. We're aware of all of the benefits, and we are pressing for all of those with our partners. Unfortunately, we can't announce anything as yet, and they can't, because obviously they are going through a expansive site selection. But I encourage all of you, to both the councillors on this meeting and anybody who's looking in, to voice your support for a hospital, a new facility within this borough, and one that is expanded to take care of the healthcare needs, not just of now in the next 5 years, but over the next 50 years, as has been the hospital in its current position. So look, I look forward to a bright health future for us, because it brings other benefits. But I assure you and this committee that officers, both senior and junior, are looking to facilitate that new facility within our borough. And I promise you, as soon as I can, and I'm sure as soon as they can, the announcement will be made. But trust us on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Councillor Conesco, I would just very quickly like to hand the chair over to you. I've got a pet emergency happening here. I need to go and secure my animals. Okay. If you continue with section number 5, Councillor Cubitt was next. Okay, and then obviously move on to number 6. okay, then I'll be back as soon as I possibly can. I just need to go and secure my animals. Okay, thank you.
No problem at all, Chair. Councillor Cubitt, you've got your hand raised electronically. Was there anything you wanted to add to section 5?
No, sorry. I think I should have lowered it.
That's okay, no problem at all. So let's move on to section 6, funding landscape. Any comments on that? Yes, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Cubitt, you're muted at the moment.
So we've got a discussion about papers that we're going to be discussing in November at the end of this evening. But I just wanted to flag to you all that in 2015, I think I made a reference to it at the last CPH, we had an overall total infrastructure cost of 247 million, and we had an overall infrastructure funding shortfall of 190 million. That was in papers in 2015. And that's the reality of this funding landscape. Okay, so all the housing that we're apparently having to build going forward, and all the everything that's going to happen in 2015, we already had 190 million pound funding shortfall on infrastructure. So as long as the rest of the members are happy with that within the context, I'm not 100% happy with what the proposals are here in terms of relying on the LEP, because the LEP represents a lot of boroughs, and it represents Surrey, and it represents Hampshire County Council, and we're just a little small voice. And I think we really need to beef up plans. And I don't know what the answer is, and it's not a criticism of Jack or David. It's just an horrific situation that we find ourselves in, and I think we need to work out a way of how we're going to meet that infrastructure shortfall.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. I think, Chair, you're back in control, and your pet emergency has been resolved.
Yes, thank you. I must apologise to members. I think I need to buy a new stairgate tomorrow. Okay, to keep the boys contained. Okay, so has anybody else got any questions on section number 6? No, then moving through to section number 7, delivery and governance. Has anybody got any comments on that, please? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regard to the idea of this board that's going to be created, I'm conscious that it's in kind of just words at the moment, and you're thinking about it and how it might be shaped and how you might go about it. So to input to that, I think the inclusivity of it is absolutely critical to make this strategy work. And I don't think it can be just business. I think this needs to have the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector party to it. If you're going to make this a success, and one of the strategic things that the LSP used to be was a board of decision makers that could come together to strategically place each of their issues, each of their concerns on the table, and then jointly take it forward in a quite constructive action sort of way. It wasn't so much about being an action plan or being a talking shop, it was more about the action plan. So I think if your board and this idea of this board was along those lines, that would be excellent. I don't think it be simply left up to the executive to be part of that board. I think the good strength of the LSP in the past was that it also included the opposition groups as part of the conversation that took place around that table. So I would, by all means, it's the administration is the administration, but then the opposition was invited to be observers to that previous historic board. That would be a model I would endorse. And I'd very much like to be part of that as a representative of my own group. So from that perspective, I think the 3 opposition groups should have at least a seat around that table as observers only, and the administration does its business with all those different parties to get the agenda moving forward. Let's be inclusive, let's be constructive. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor James, please. Actually, but sorry, Councillor James, if I can stop you there. I would like Councillor Rattigan to come back on Councillor Harvey's point, please.
Councillor Harvey, I have no problem about proposing that at the next group leaders and listen to their thoughts on it, but I'll not make a decision until I've discussed it with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Councillor James, I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but I thought it was important that Councillor Rattigan came back with comments to Councillor Harvey, but please go ahead.
Thank you. Mine was just on in relation to the proposed sort of framework that we have here, which is a 12-month framework throughout the report. And I think it would be important that throughout the our EPH meetings going forward, that we have a regular update on the agenda, just on how this this report is going and how that all those focuses are happening. I think it's important, if it's not in a form of a officer, but if it's just a written report that gives us an update. But I think we ought to just see how that's going. And I'm echoing what Councillor Harvey has said. I don't think that this board should be remote. I think we need to be able to have an understanding of what they're doing, where they're going, and if they're going to, because in the paper earlier on it talks about them identifying some key projects. I think it's about the democratic accountability of that board, and for us to have a clear understanding of what's happening on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. What I've actually done is I've just made a note on my my work my work stream, okay, to maybe think about something, maybe in January. Okay, we obviously do need to see things advance a little further on. Okay, but I've just made a note on there, so just to capture that point, Councillor James. Okay, I've got Councillor Konesko, then I've got Councillor Cubitt, and then I've got Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. My comments relate to section 7.2.5 through to 7.2.7, which is all about measuring success.
Sure.
We talk about an economic dashboard to track key economic indicators. And I think that certainly makes sense, because ultimately what we're trying to achieve is to minimise unemployment and to maximise growth of our local economy as much as possible. I think also we need to, if it's not included in here already, is to look at the actual interventions that we're having. So, how many new businesses have we helped to start up? How many new businesses are we incubating? Because it's those the bigger factors around growth and around unemployment are partly out of our control. But the issues around the number of people trained are very much what we have control over, and we ought to be measured against that as well.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Konesko. Councillor Cubitt, please.
Yeah, hi, just very briefly. I think the board's a great idea, but I don't agree with Councillor Harvey. I think the board should be us, the council, with the business generating community, not any of the third sector or the talking shops. This is about economic recovery. Third sector and public sector do not create jobs. They never have done, they never will do. The reality is, it is the private sector that will be the motor behind our economic recovery. And therefore, I think it would be a tragedy if the board did involve a whole load of public sector talking shop, third sector charities. By all means, have them come in on one-offs. But I would have this, if its agenda is to enable Basingstoke to be at the forefront of an economic recovery, where we're facilitating an environment to help power our facilitate as easy a ride with the private sector, then the last thing we want to do is bog it down with a whole load of public sector talking shops. And I don't think the public sector, to be honest, has come up smelling of roses with this COVID either. We wouldn't have had food on our table, and we wouldn't have had a survival if the private sector hadn't been brave enough to get out and do what the public sector is refusing to do. And I'm afraid at the moment, I don't have very high regard for how the public sector is operating at the moment in this current pandemic. And therefore, I really wouldn't want them on the board. I would want our private sector who are prepared to walk the mile.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Rattigan.
Although I'm ideologically on the same page as Councillor Cubitt most of the time, I do think there is a role for our educationalists, people who can upskill individuals at this time. And to be honest, our own government having exactly covered themselves in roses during this pandemic either. So I think there is a role for many. At what level, I'm not yet sure, but I assure her that the driver of economic development, economic recovery will be the private sector, and they will have the biggest say in what goes ahead. But there will be involvement from people who are in the third sector or educationalists, because we need to drive that skills sector to generate the money that will pay for all of this in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rattigan. Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important just to point out who the largest employer in Basingstoke is. It's our hospital. The public sector is one of the largest employers in our borough. And if you cut the public sector out of this discussion, you're cutting out a huge proportion of our workforce. And that would be so arrogant and so silly for us to do that. So I understand what you're saying, but it's just so wrong. You know, the public sector and the private sector need to work together. They are symbiotic in having any recovery come to fruition. And if we think the private sector is going to do it all on its own, what do good businesses want when they come to a town like ours? They want good health, in good housing, with good schools, with good facilities and good leisure, and all the rest of it that goes with a public sector that delivers part of the bargain of being a great place to live. The private sector has its role, the public sector has its role, and unless they work together cooperatively, and we've always been the broker in that, that has been Basingstoke and Dean's USP for donkey's years, that we as the Borough Council can bring those parties together in such a way that we are the greater than the sum of their parts. We're the bit that glues it all together. And if we can't do that, we will fail. So we have to have the public sector at the table, not just because they're the biggest, one of the biggest employers in the town, the carers, the NHS workers, our nurses, our doctors, all of those people who through COVID have been amazing, absolutely amazing. I don't want to denigrate the public sector and what they've done during COVID, because they're the ones who we've put on the front line to deal with the virus, who have been amazing people. And I thank them, I really thank them for everything they've done, particularly our carers and our NHS workers, among many. So I don't want to denigrate the public sector in any way, shape or form about their response to COVID. I think we should celebrate them and thank them, but at the same time, in terms of this strategy, they have a seat at the table and we shouldn't cut them out of that.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'd just like to remind all members that I would like people or members to speak to the chair, and please refrain from speaking to each other.
Yeah,
okay.
That
wasn't pointed necessarily at you, Councillor Harvey. Okay, it was just a time where I could interject into your speech. Okay, so thank you for that. I'd like to bring in Councillor George, please.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the, it's pretty clear here the membership of the board is up for the debate here, and I don't know who's going to be on it, but I think we really need to recognise here that the very, very importance of a lot of the small and medium enterprise businesses, and I don't quite know how they're going to be represented. The key thing here we've got in consideration we give to an online survey. Well, my view is that unless you get people on board at the early stage in an open forum, not asking them, leading questions and things like that, get them to really sit down with you and say, this is what we think, this is where we've changed our plans, what have you. Unless you have those open forums, it's not a bottom-up approach, it then becomes very much a top-down. So my view is, early on in the stages, is let's have some open forums, particularly with the smaller businesses, and try and get their views of what they really need, rather than deciding what needs to happen, then put a survey out and say, is this all right? Or, we think this should be done, what do you think about it? It really needs to be a bottom-up approach. That's my particular view.
Thank you, Councillor George. Councillor Waldridge, please.
Thank you, Chair. basically, absolutely, elements of the public sector need to be involved in this board. The health and educationalists, as has been said, and and to actually to put down our public sector, who have been amazing during this crisis, is I'm flabbergasted actually that that's been done, and our third sector, the voluntary sector, who's been the backbone in getting Basingstoke through this.
Can I please remind you to speak to the chair?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, but so through the chair, can I thank? Can you pass my thanks to the leader for actually giving the commitment that the public sector will be involved in this board and showing leadership in committing to that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge. Okay, let's move on. Okay, if no one has anything else, okay, go on to corporate implications, legal. I'm not supposing that anyone's got any questions on that, or number 9, or possibly number 10. Okay, does anybody have any more questions on effectively, the rest of the reports, through to well, 14 really. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly on section 11 on equalities.
Sure.
If one outcome of COVID, and I know this section alludes to it, but it does need to be understood, I think, throughout the report, and I think it is that inequality has been severely affected by COVID, such that we are now seeing the greatest levels of inequality among some of the most vulnerable members of our community, both in their social mobility, but also in their access to services. And we're doing all we can, I know that, and this important piece of paperwork here, the strategy is a key part of that. But I do think we need to acknowledge that COVID has increased the level of inequality in our local society, and everything that this paper could do to address that is fundamental. So I appreciate this in this section, but the inequality bit is really, really important, because that's what so many people are facing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think 11.3 kind of does go into the inequalities, mentioning the BAME groups as well. So, I too agree that the inequalities, excuse me, I must have my wife's teeth in. Okay, the inequalities do need to be maintained and highlighted strongly in the report. Okay. Moving on to, unless anybody else has got any other comments, Councillor Waldridge.
Just a quick point there. It's imperative that they're there within the KPIs for this. That
Exactly.
it's shown that they're reduced for the reasons stated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldridge. Councillor James.
I don't know COVID increasing inequalities. Well, I think it did. It actually highlighted the inequalities. So if we look at housing, education, employment, I think it exposed inequality in a really big way. And I think if this, and I'm not sure, as Paul has said, I think that this, and Karen, I think that this report has to identify that gap. And and we need to go further to address that the gap, which is growing. It identified lots of things, COVID, in relation to how we address domestic violence, what we do about how housing, particularly the inequalities in housing and how that impacted on people. And so I think that it's fundamental part of this strategy. And we need to look at and how we're going to measure how we improve on that divide.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, actually, I mean, I agree, obviously, inequalities have to be reduced, but the greatest inequality that has transpired as a result of COVID is that the public sector have been insulated from what has been an enormous economic impact. And so the inequality that has been highlighted during this pandemic is that the private sector that finances the public sector has had some very harsh times, and there is a cohort of community who have got much richer because they have been paid full salary. They have been sitting at home. They haven't had to worry about how their businesses can operate. And that is the greatest truth of this pandemic, is that the biggest inequality that has been highlighted by this pandemic is that the public sector have been insulated and protected from what has been an economic tsunami, and the private sector is trying desperately hard to survive, because if we don't protect and we don't have an economic recovery program and we don't support the private sector, then
Excuse me, can I interrupt you there, Councillor Cubitt?
very harsh times.
Which sector are you, section are you looking at for this?
I'm referring to the references to equality in section 11. I'm referring to the fact that Councillor James said that, Mr. Chairman, that the COVID had produced and demonstrated massive inequalities. And I'm just saying that the greatest inequality of all has been how the private sector.
Stop you there, Councillor Cubitt. Yes, Councillor James was referring to 11.3. Okay, which, you know, it does actually state that you know, that there are inequalities there. I was just wondering which section you were referring to with the public sector versus the private sector. Because I'm struggling to see where your comment would fit in section 11.
Well, if you look at the title, it's called Equalities, and it talks about
it
work
is,
that's
yes,
been
it
carried
is.
out. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I was agreeing with you. Yes, it does. But I'm just asking you. You know.
And it talks about the public sector equality duty, and I'm just saying a truth, which is that the greatest inequality of all that has existed as a result of this pandemic is that the public sector has been completely insulated, and the inequalities that have been meted out by the private sector.
Okay, Councillor Cubitt, thank you very much for your comment. Okay, moving through, okay, to section 12 through to section 14. Any comments on that from the committee? No? Okay, so then moving through to section 15, the conclusion. Has anybody got any comments on the conclusion? Anybody gone? Okay, so that's good there. Okay, so thank you very much for that committee. We are approaching 9:30. Okay, and we have 2 items left, plus the work programme. I would like to you know, have the committee's permission to adjourn, to scrap standing orders, okay, and put a time of, say, you know, 10:30 on this to see whether we can get through the agenda. Do I have the agreement of the committee, please? Can we have hands up for yes? Okay, preferably, sorry. Can we have electronic hands up for yes, please? Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 5. Okay. 6. Anybody else? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. All right. That is a majority. So I'll take the standing orders have been abolished, okay, for the 9:30 finish time, and we will move to a new time of 10:30. Okay, so hopefully we can get these last couple of motions in. So we have a couple of speakers, okay, which are I've been waiting patiently, and these are Councillor Chris Tomblin, okay, who will get 4 minutes, and then we have Paul Beavers again, Martin Bierman, Martin Heath, Sheila Peacock, Miranda Chubb and Julian Jones, all wanting to speak against the or to the next point, which is the climate emergency SPD motion. So, Sadie, would you like to bring in Chris Tomlin first? And if you can stand by, Andy, with your stopwatch. Councillor Chris Tomlin, as a member participation, okay, we'll get 4 minutes. Okay, just so you know.
Okay, good evening, Councillor Tomlin. I'm going to start the clock shortly. Just to let you know, I will give you about a minute's warning when your time's about to run out. So
right,
feel free to begin now.
So hopefully, good evening, members. You can hear me.
Yeah.
Because from your previous motion, my internet is pretty poor, and I'd love to go to Cornwall to get better internet. So we've got a bit of work to do in Basingstoke. Anyway, this motion, it was good to see, obviously at full council, unanimous support. And I also, notice, of course, on DC, we do have now always an informative added to the planning application conditions. So we sort of moved forward here a little bit. Some applications that have come in, clearly the Chinham Shopping Centre was a massive missed opportunity, but we are where we are. We have got this distribution warehouse to consider coming up Junction 7. However, we have had some good responses from those particular applicants where they seem to be embracing our concept, but of course nothing is agreed because we just haven't got the bite that we need. I mean, industrial and commercial places, they are the best place to create and use green energy, if you like, carbon neutrality, because they don't take up any land. It's existing. So those are the great opportunities that we need to embrace. But moving on to the motion, I would ask this committee, maybe you could help me understand the lawfulness or unlawfulness of asking for an SPD. In preparing the motion, I did a bit of research, and a solicitor from, or lawyer rather, from Bevan Britton, who I know is a company well known to our council, we've taken advice in the past from them, was suggesting, a lady called Catherine Lawrence was suggesting that an SPD is a way forward, to actually take your local plan and replace it with a lot more detail. And it only takes 6 to 9 months to prepare with consultation. They were suggesting that it was obviously a way forward. Now, our local plan obviously is being looked at 2023. It's a long way away. And one confusion that I seem to suffer is that our local plan, on the one hand, is out of date. That's why we're reviewing it. But then it's still used heavily. So it's trying to understand whether it's valid, it's not valid, or it's valid at certain times. We have got an emergency. We need to focus. We need to try and do something while we can and not miss it. And we have to remember.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you. We've got to remember that the children, it's our grandchildren's children who are going to see climate emergencies for reality. And that isn't very far away. And we're not going to be, well, I'm not going to be around, so it's not going to bother me, sadly. But what I'm hoping that members might consider is some form of challenging the government on planning to get this planning and environmental climate change clarified, so that we can actually, we said earlier, take control of our borough and our building and our moving forward. So possibly working parties, whatever, I'm available to help. Whatever you need, I'm willing to help. So I'll leave that with you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Okay, let's move on to the next speaker, Paul Beavers. Okay, and I'll hand him over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening again, Mr. Beavers. Welcome back. As before, you've got 2 minutes, and I shall let you know when you've only got 30 seconds left. So please begin.
Okay, 4 points again. I want to support the motion for a climate change SPD, but I would suggest that council should explore whatever opportunities they have for achieving more from the existing policy text. There often is opportunities. 2, inclusion in the climate change motion of a reference to the distribution hub seems wrong and surely should not have been included. The hub is contentious, conflicts with the green infrastructure strategy, is outside the local plan, and is now a planning application. 3, biodiversity makes possible a living and livable planet. Climate change has been impacting all living things for decades without action to redress. Climate change responses must be accompanied simultaneously by significant action to restore viable habitats and biodiversity. This need isn't being discussed in this committee or council. Why not, please? 4, the only green infrastructure funded projects in the IDP are essentially for play areas and allotments. Little to combat the consequences of habitat and biodiversity loss. BNDBC ignored the NERC Act 2006 and has not mapped or produced an action plan for restoring natural green habitats and networks in urban or rural areas in accordance with the MPPF 2012.
30 seconds.
Council has invested next to nothing to restore biodiversity on its own land or even to encourage and incentivise communities or other landowners to be more engaged. This is a planning committee. When has this committee or any other committee or councillor questioned why Cabinet has not acted, and when will it do so? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beavers. Okay, let's go on to Mr. Bierman, please.
Welcome back, Mr. Bierman. As before, you've got 2 minutes, and I shall let you know when you only have 30 seconds remaining. So feel free to start now.
Just unmuted, thank you. I've read the previous minutes on this topic, and I too am having real difficulty in understanding why an SPD can't be introduced at this stage. It's puzzling me massively. But that said, the motion before you at the moment does mention the Chinham Shopping Centre, something on which was discussed at Development Control. It was passed, the application was. It was a massive opportunity lost for the opportunities that existed to improve so many things in terms of the application, be it on energy, efficiency, transport, and a whole lot of other green issues. And that was not because anybody was being wicked or anything. It was a question of the officers taking very much the permissive approach. In other words, a developer puts something forward and you find a way of helping them to gain permission, rather than saying, is this in accord with our best interests locally? And our best interests locally are supported by the local plan. And if one looks at the local plan as it stands, even without improvements, there are so many things that are being ignored that could be made firmer, that could be used as a handle on which to hang an SPD to take forward environmental issues at this stage. Because the point is, we're dealing with a climate, thank you, we're dealing with a climate emergency. That means emergency. And it's sort of the way it's being dealt with at the moment makes me think of the development of the top of the town, which went on for years and years and years, and we're still not developed the top of the town. It's urgent, it's got to be done. And my final words are just to say that it needn't be, sorry, Councillor Cubitt, necessarily in opposition to good economics. The previous discussion was very important on economics, I agree, but it provides opportunities, not barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bierman. Okay, I'd like to now welcome Martin Heath, please.
Good evening, Mr. Heath. Welcome. As with the other speakers, you've got 2 minutes, and I shall let you know when you're down to your final 30 seconds. So feel free to begin whenever you're ready. And you are on mute at the moment. Mr. Heath, you appear to be on mute. Mr. Heath, that's it. You're unmuted now, so I'll restart the 2 minutes. Bear with me. Your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Chair. The decisions that this committee make have a huge impact on policy, and it has a huge influence on our future new local plan. Now, I know it's a cliche, but we truly are at a crossroads, or indeed there may be a perfect storm, actually, of climate emergency and COVID. Now, the climate emergency motion is a clear statement of intent, but now it must really become action. We've already lost 14 months, and we should make no mistake, going from where we are today to net zero in just 12 years is a mammoth task. But it does create massive opportunities to create and invest in one of the industries and jobs of the future. So I think now this is really the time to make bold decisions and begin to move towards, with pace, to a carbon-free world. Now, it's simple. The climate emergency is caused by three things. It's caused by burning fossil fuels. It's by the way we manage our land and our waste and our diets and what we eat. But 80% is due to burning fossil fuels. They create millions of tons, indeed 1.4 million tons of greenhouse gases in Basingstoke alone last year. And that doesn't include international travel or shipping or the goods we import. That's a massive amount. And that amount must be zero before the end of this decade. Now, we've done reasonably well since 2005. You know, we've got that it was 1.9 million, it's now 1.4 million. But that's only because of the actions of others outside our borough. It's due to the massive shift from coal to renewable energy.
30 seconds.
The transport emissions have actually gone up since 2005 in our borough. So really, to get to net zero as a minimum, we do need to use less in energy, and we must be far more efficient in the way we use it. We need to generate that energy from local networks and local renewable sources. And yes, as Councillor Cooper has pointed out, we do need heat pumps, we do need heat networks, we do need the private sector to be involved in that. But it does require a massive transformation in our energy systems and our transport systems.
Thank you, Steve. I'm afraid your time is up. If you want to just conclude very quickly.
Yeah, and we need to have a bold plan, one that puts Basingstoke at the leading edge, one that creates jobs, one that improves our environment and makes Basingstoke a leader rather than a follower, and one that creates the industries of the future. And it's all about building back better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heath. Okay, I'd like to invite Sheila Peacock, please.
Hello. Thanks.
Good evening. Welcome. Just to let you know, like the other speakers, you've got 2 minutes to state your case. I will let you know when you're down to your final 30 seconds. So please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. This point should actually have been put to the previous agenda item. I wanted to ask, could a thread be worked into the climate emergency SPD to address both the climate and the coronavirus emergencies by committing the borough to education and skill boosting to provide a workforce able to address the needs of the climate emergency? I was thinking in terms of a climate change academy in which local people of all ages, particularly college age, can learn relevant skills, and that it could also act as a think tank and support local climate related applied research. And we could get a national expert in to lead it, and it could become a resource to the whole country. I think feeling involved in real research might motivate people to help them work against the sense of climate hopelessness. I'd like to commend to you 2 reports: the Campaign for Science and Engineering, submitted to the government's research and development levelling up agenda, calling for strong leadership from local government to maximise local impact of greater research and development activity. And Prospect Trade Union has made a 10-point plan for a green recovery in the energy sector, calling for more research and development and for a net zero carbon workforce plan, which means training. So thank you very much. I will email to Democratic Services a copy of this with links to these 2 reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Peacock. Okay, I'd like to introduce Miranda Chubb, please.
Good evening, welcome. As with all the other speakers, you have 2 minutes. I shall let you know when you're down to your final 30 seconds that you're able to wrap up. So whenever you're ready, please feel free to start.
Thank you. Grateful for the opportunity to speak. I would like to know in what format the SPD would be developed to address the climate emergency within our local plan. We all know urgent changes are required to meet our current commitments, which include the declaration of a climate emergency, the commitment to be a carbon neutral borough by 2030, the Horizon 2050 vision, commitment to reduce carbon emissions and ensure use of renewable energy is prevalent, the legally binding Paris Carbon Agreement targets, and the National Planning Policy Framework climate change targets. There are already some climate change related requirements in the existing Basingstoke local plan, which currently states that proposals for new development or refurbishment should actually respond to the challenges of climate change. They should be designed to minimise energy consumption, and they should facilitate the incorporation of renewable or low carbon technologies. But despite this, we haven't really seen a big take-up of new developments or refurbishments being built to net zero standards and incorporate renewable energy. We are in a climate emergency, and we really need to give a more detailed and legal footing via an SPD to ensure a change to net zero design standards and the incorporation of renewable energy in any new residential or commercial building developments in our area. And I'd like to know if this will be done via a climate and emergency SPD, or potentially an updated design and sustainability SPD, or a planning obligations SPD, or another similar method, just to ensure the positive change we need and to make steps towards meeting our climate change commitments, and to also support our green recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chubb. Okay, I'd finally like to bring in Julian Jones. Hello, Julian. Okay, I'll pass you over to Councillor Konescu for timings.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jones. As with the other speakers, you have 2 minutes. I shall let you know when you're down to your final 30 seconds so that you're able to wrap up in good time. So whenever you're ready, please start.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay. Dublin Parish Council supports the borough's declaration of the climate emergency and the action to achieve that net carbon zero levels by 2030. And it's sympathetic to the motion. However, we consider that, as with the borough's vision for the land north of M3 Junction 7, the link to the existing local plan isn't sufficient to permit development of an SPD. In fact, the applicant's proposal for the warehouse there is 270,000 square meters of space, more than double the 122,000 square meters identified in the local plan, and almost 4 times the 72,000 in the borough's economic needs assessment. The application fails to meet the tests for local plan policy EP1 for developing proposals for storage and distribution floor space outside an existing strategic employment area. So basing an SPD on this warehouse development seems to be very risky. In our opinion, the reference to the Basingstoke Gateway warehouse in the supporting text, and if it appears in the SPD, is in danger of breaching procedures for predetermination of the application. It also anticipates the local hospital's location, though North Hampshire hospitals haven't yet published their lists of shortlist sites or indeed conducted public consultation. I suggest you abandon the motion in its present form and instead work for climate change to be adopted with a revised local plan. In the meantime, the borough should encourage existing warehouse operators, particularly those whose warehouses are vacant, to install solar PV panels on their roofs. That way they can at least get a return on that land.
I'm afraid your time's up. If you want to just spend the final few seconds wrapping up.
No, I was only going to say we'll be making points about the applicant's climate claims in our responses to the application.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Right, well, the motion is there in front of us, members. But I would like to point out that at the last full council meeting, it was pointed out by the portfolio holder that we can't actually do an SPD because there are no hooks in the current local plan to be able to hang the SPD on. Whereas there could be something in the new local plan, but we'd require, you know, some policy to be wordsmithed first before we could then hang on the SPD. And I have to say that, you know, I'm not sure that that would meet the 6 month time frame. So I'm sort of at a bit of a loss here, where to go forward. And I would welcome the committee's views, please. Okay, Councillor Waldridge, please, first.
Sorry, I haven't put my hand up at all yet at this point.
All right, okay, sorry.
Yes, apologies. Yeah, bye.
Okay, Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be incredibly controversial, and I'm going to suggest that we could have our cake and eat it. I'm going to suggest that we could have an SPD based on the existing local plan, and that we can use that as a vehicle to develop better policy in our new local plan. The very first policy of our existing local plan talks, as the NPF does, of the presumption in favour of sustainable development. We have not taken the opportunity to explore our existing local plan policies in their many form in that local plan in a much more detailed fashion that would define the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And that's your hook, because all of the other local authorities that I could point to, and the first example that comes to mind is Reading, with their local plan that was adopted in November 2019, has that as their first point. Let us define as our climate change and sustainable and ecological policies, to pick up Mr. Beaver's points as well, in a presumption of sustainable development. And that's right at the top. That's the very first policy suite they do in their local plan, actually, is the whole climate change agenda that then underwrites the rest of their local plan. But that is for 2023. That's going to take us that long if the timetable is stuck to.
Absolutely.
If the timetable is actually able to meet that quite ambitious agenda of getting it to 2023, because we've got to go through an examination in public, we've got to go through consultations. Look how long it took us to do the last local plan. And that's, of course, if the local planning policy framework stays the same, because the government want to change the goalposts. So in that sense, us doing an SPD in the next few months with our existing local plan would be very useful for development control, because instead of an informative, we would be giving them a policy suite. And it might well be that you want to adapt the design and sustainability SPD that currently exists and merely add to it and develop that a little bit further to give them a material consideration for DC to hang a decision on. It would only be that suite of policy that would help them in the current framework. That's all it would be. But it would be better than an informative would be. And legally, there is no issue to that. Legally, there's no problem to that, because other local authorities have gone down that road. Legally, we've got different, and as ever, you can get the legal opinion you want, it's how much you pay for it. The old routine comes down to, if we want to do this for an SPD, we can do it. And other authorities have gone down that road. I'd like to support, Chair, a task and finish panel being set up with the specific purpose of exploring this. Let's get round the table and have a discussion as members about where we could take this in support of an SPD now to support the future local plan as well. I mean, there's no reason why we can't do it unless we are about putting obstacles in the way. And I don't think we're like that, because obviously Cabinet's working up its action plan, which is great. And I really do commend them for that, and thank you. But that's the Cabinet element. Well, this is a DC element that we need to put in place. So I do think an SPD can be done. There's no reason why it can't. And it would support the new local plan going forward, Chair. And I'd like to propose that we do consider a task and finish panel for this motion to look at and explore how we can get an SPD up and running and how we can support the new local plan group that is working on those new policies. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. I've got Councillor George, please.
Thank you, Chair. Having looked at all this, I think it is pretty clear that I've looked in some detail at all our existing policies, and there are a few actually which are interesting. There's a lot of site-specific policies which at least mention sustainability and give some little hooks, but they're not terribly enforceable. That's the only problem with them, and they rely on a lot of goodwill from the developers to take them forward. On that is, and what we have achieved, I think, in a couple of cases, as I recall, is getting conditions in certainly the outline plan applications, really to monitor how well the basically the developers are going to implement their, should we say, aspirations to include renewable elements within their design. So I think we could probably develop those a little bit and make sure that where we can, we include monitoring in there. So, tends to be where things are measured, they get done. So let's have something there so we can actually see how well developers do, such as at Chinham. They promised to do things, or they wish to do things, or they've got aspirations to do things. Let's see how that really comes out in practice so we can hold their feet to the fire. So I think there's something we can do there. There's clearly something we can do on EM8, which is the supports commercial, renewable, large, low carbon energy generation. Now, the reality is fundamentally, it doesn't matter how we buy our energy. At the end of the day, we have an energy mix in this country. It doesn't include enough renewables or low carbon energy. And if we have a look at what's been done on that, if we go back to the original report, renewable energy and low carbon development study, which was done many, many years ago, and there's been no real allocations to help there. So there's certainly an area we can look at in terms of EM8, in terms of allocating areas that may be suitable for renewable generation. We can certainly do a little on that. But the rest of it, EM9, the water, is very prescriptive, and that's widely implemented at the moment. That's all very good, and that's going ahead. EM10, there's an element to minimize energy consumption through sustainable approaches. But again, that's very difficult to implement given the current building standards, and there's limits on that. And CN6 requires developers to provide contribution to infrastructure. So whether we could include energy infrastructure within that, although it's not specifically mentioned, and CN9 to provide sufficient scope to refocus transport away from private cars. But once again, there's not a lot of hooks in there. So the reality is that our local plan doesn't have a lot of enforceable hooks for us to actually develop the SPD again, except in the areas I mentioned there. Councillor Harvey mentions Reading. I've had a good look at their plan. They've based everything around the BREEAM assessments, really, in terms of certainly of new build anyway, which is very, very good. But once again, even BREEAM excellent doesn't get you to a point of zero carbon. That's the problem we've got. So even where SPDs have been developed, such as at Reading, under existing legislation, it's difficult to reach where we really like to go. So I do have some concerns, but I think there's an enormous amount of work that's got to go in to enabling us to quite radically change what our existing policies. It's going to have to be a radical change to achieve anything like what we're asking for in the climate emergency within the borough. We're going to have to put a lot of work in. So I think there's a very good idea about starting the process. But we've also got to take on board the fact that there's we've got our climate change and air quality strategy coming forward. Now, I haven't really seen that. The key issue, I'm guessing that's going to be very similar to like the local plan. It's going to be strategic and it needs a lot of detail put to it. So I see no problem about starting something, but to achieve an SPD, which will be enforceable to any great extent in our planning applications and have real hooks, I do find difficulty doing that. I really do inside the 6 months. I think there's a lot we can do within the next 6 months or year, but it's not going to achieve an SPD. And I'll be very controversial here again. Even if we do one, if you look at the way the parking SPD was enforceable in the Chinham development, is it going to be actually any use to us at all if they come up with other viable alternatives? So it is, the parking SPDs is widely ignored in our planning applications as far as I can see, and as they come through. So my view is there's a lot we can do. I think there's a lot of preparation and there's a lot of uncertainties that we're going to have to look at. Are we going for electric cars or are they going to be hydrogen cars in the future? I don't know. I think there's a lot also in terms of, you know, clearly government are going to provide the framework under which we can do all these things and what we can achieve through the planning process. But if we look at our borough, we have some great specifics, you know, heat pumps, groundwater heat pumps, all these things have been mentioned. And I think there's a real need to look at the technologies in detail and their applicability to our specific borough here. You know, you know, each borough is going to be very different in what's going to be viable and workable. And I think we really need to look at these in detail. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here and maybe moving towards an SPD, but I don't think we can achieve an enforceable one within the next 6 months. That's my honest view.
Thank you, Councillor George. Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, so I would just like to say three things. I would like to second Councillor Harvey's proposal.
Thank you.
I would like to agree with him that if, keep it simple, stupid, and the teeth comes from the MPPF. It's not, it doesn't require a brain. We don't need to make it complicated. I think Paul Beaver's comments about biodiversity are essential. I think we're all in agreement on that. We've all talked for many years about the importance of biodiversity. I think the points that Martin make are very valid too, albeit that I don't agree that there are 3 reasons, there are 4, because he never, and climate emergency people never make reference to population, and population is the reason why we've got a climate emergency. So Martin, you need to be a little bit more honest and say there's 4 reasons for climate emergency. That's it. I would second it, but I also want to reaffirm the understanding that Martin Bierman and Councillor Tomlin made, which is that it is essential that we do not prejudice businesses operating in our borough and result in them going elsewhere as best we can. So harnessing optimal and positives, not impacting negatives.
Okay, Councillor Cubitt, thank you very much. Then I've got Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Some of us on this committee have been around long enough to remember the last local plan preparation. I ended up chairing P&I when we were going through the painful process of putting the policies together that we now have in our local plan. And I'd like to go back to the mention in it's already been mentioned here, that at full council, the portfolio holder stood up and told this council in no uncertain terms why you can't have an SPD. At the moment, and this has been reinforced by Councillor David George, and thank you for that, Dave, the local plan is under review. That review is there by planning law insisting that every 5 years a local plan has to be reviewed. We've got no choice. And that's why for the last, I'm going to guess around 10 months, that the planning policy staff in the planning department have been undertaking that review. And we've got the Sheila is being produced with the core sites. Now that's all starting in part of this review. While the plan is under review, and I would stand to be corrected, the portfolio holder said, you can't produce an SPD because the review of the local plan will involve a review of every policy within that plan. And that is the time when you look and see at motions like this, which I've got no problem with. We need to address it. But if we do it out with and try and hang on those weak hooks, as Councillor George mentioned, we're subject to challenge, because believe you me, there will be, because some of this will be at a cost to developers. They will challenge everything they can. We need to be sure that we can't be challenged as a local planning authority. I just put that out there. I would love for it to happen, but we have to be very, very careful. And I'm reiterating what Councillor Markrofeld said at full council. I haven't dreamt this up. And I've talked to Jo Bromley, and she explained this to me months ago about the way that the format and the review of the local plan is taking place. Yes, we all want to make sure that we get it right, and I think that's the important thing, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Sorry, Councillor Miller. I've got Councillor Harvey, and then I think what we'll do, because obviously time's coming on. Yeah, Councillor Harvey first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think this is where the task and finish panel can come into its own, because we can explore that collectively as a collective and the very points that are being raised. But I do, in a sense, there's two juxtaposed positions here, and I do understand it, where the local plan, which is being reviewed under those sets of rules, exactly as Councillor Miller describes, is based around new policy frameworks and new policies. And that's absolutely legitimate. And don't forget what the office has told us at the beginning of that process. We don't have to review all those policies if we as an authority choose that our existing policies are good enough. So in fact, we can say that we don't review everything. We only review that which we choose to. That's fine. That's legitimately part of the process. We have to justify that, but that is part of the process. What we're talking about in the context of an SPD is the holding mechanism using the existing local plan policies. So it isn't looking directly as an SPD to influence the new policies. That will be done by the policy framework group that's been set up to do that. What we're saying here is you might get to 2023, you might get to 2025 by the time you actually adopt a new local plan. And not a single one of those new policies will be enforceable by a development control committee until that local plan has gone through full council and been adopted. It's all speculation until then, and it will be changed through an examination in public, and it will be changed through consultation that will be undertaken in the years to come doing the new local plan review. Meanwhile, you as the chair of planning, Councillor Miller, through you, Chair, sorry, forgive me, Councillor Miller as chair of planning will be dealing with the applications that come before his committee now. So using our existing framework, exactly as Councillor Cubitt describes, using the NPPF and using the presumption in favour of sustainable development designed as we see fit, as us as local councillors see fit, can help us. And that's all it's going to do. Help us in the interim, in this period running up to the adoption of our new local plan. So really, in a sense, that's all we're asking for. We're asking for using all of the levers at our disposal now to do something now that will help the situation, hoping that we will be just as good as we've all described with new policy by 2023. So, Chair, I'd very much support the setting up of a task and finish panel, and Councillor Cubitt has kindly seconded me in that regard, and I thank her for that, and support what she said and others have said. Let's have a good and detailed conversation.
Okay, Councillor Harvey. Are there any more speakers to the motion? No. No. Okay. So basically, as I understand it, I understand your point, Councillor Harvey. Okay, about using the NPPF and the levers in the current local plan. I understand it. We have a motion on the table. I understand that it's also been seconded. What I'm proposing to do, okay, I'm proposing that what we do is we adjourn this item to the next committee meeting, okay, where which will allow me to speak to Ruth Ornella and also Mark Raffel, okay, to just to scope out and see what we can actually do, you know, and see whether, you know, Councillor Harvey's suggestion is a nice little workaround. Okay, so that's what I'm proposing to do. Okay, and I hope I have the committee's agreement with that. Councillor Harvey.
Can I suggest, Chair, that if you establish the task and finish panel, that Councillor Raffel and our officers could come to that panel and raise those very points with us in discussion in a lot better time frame than waiting to the next committee cycle, which will be taking us up to Christmas. Not to take away from what you're saying in the sense of having that analysis, which is fine, but let's do it in the task and finish panel quicker than, so that we're not into after Christmas before we're really driving any particular. And it may be that it doesn't go. It may be that that's the advice that's given, and that's the end of the task and finish panel there and then. However, it might not be, in which case then we have something to work with in a much more constructive fashion than kicking it into the next 8-week cycle that takes us up to Christmas. It perhaps would be more constructive in that way, and the motion's on the table as such. So I hope it could be taken in that spirit.
I understand what you're suggesting, Councillor Harvey. I am happy to accept a task and finish group. However, I do want to speak to the portfolio holder and the head of planning, just to ensure that we can actually do this. Okay, because if we can't actually do this, then then let's not waste any more time over it. And
let's have that discussion, Chair. Absolutely, let's have that discussion with the task and finish panel and do
yeah.
it.
So what I'm suggesting, okay, is that I will happily set up a task and finish group, okay, but only after I've consulted with the portfolio holder, okay, and also the head of planning, to make sure that we can actually do this. Otherwise, I see it as not exactly a waste of time, but a doubling of workload, okay, and seeing what we can get away with, not exactly what we can get away with, but what we can do, and hook onto the MPPF. So that's what I want to do. Okay, I am happy to come back to the committee by email. Okay, and I would put 2 weeks onto that schedule. Would the committee be happy with that? Yes, no? Councillor James. Councillor James, you're on mute, I'm sorry.
I think, as Paul said, the motion has been proposed and seconded. I think that we should set up the task and finish group now, and those officers can come to that committee. You can have that discussion with them as well. But I think that we should take this forward with some urgency. Really, I think it's important that we give the commitment to the full council in relation to the vote that we had there. So I propose that we do move forward with the task and finish group.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a very good suggestion, but I would like to just say one thing. I did go along the same route as Councillor Harvey and Councillor Cubitt, but if you look at the 2019 NPPF, if you look at the failure actually to, unlike in previous versions, to define sustainable, it may be a little bit of a challenge, but I just plot that one in it, but it's something we should take into account.
Okay, so Councillor Konesko.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. I just can't see any reason why we wouldn't set up the task and finish group now. I think it's there's no harm in doing it. If the only slight issue is I think, as you've pointed out, is that it might be a bit of a waste of time if it doesn't go any further. But if the task and finish group is willing to have that conversation with Councillor Rafael and with the portfolio and with the relevant officers, then I don't see any reason why we ought to stop them.
May I just interject, Chair? From a DEM services point of view, it may just be worth establishing the members who would be interested in a task and finish group, and then depending on what happens in your correspondence with the portfolio holder and with the head of planning, then within 2 weeks you could possibly get back, and then that task and finish group, if the okay is given, are there and ready to go. That may be a way around it.
Okay, is everyone in favour of setting up the task and finish group? Yes? Raise an electronic hand, please, because I can only see a certain number. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right, okay, so how many members are we going to have on this task and finish group? So Okay, I'll Councillor Harvey.
I'd like to nominate councillors Tomlin, James and Harvey for that committee, for that task and finish panel. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and is there anybody from the Conservative side? Okay, Councillor Cubitt. I've got a raised hand, Councillor Cubitt.
Sorry, that was from before. Councillor George has put his hand up. I'm very happy for him to represent the Conservatives.
Okay. And okay, Councillor Waldridge.
Chair, I'm not quite sure I should volunteer to get involved in it, bearing in mind my current position.
No, I understand that, Councillor Moore. That's why I was keeping away, okay, from you. Councillor Court, are you able to join this task and finish group? And Councillor Gaskill?
I'm happy to. I'm happy to. I just don't know how big you want this task force to be, Chairman. I
might as well have another meeting.
Yeah, I was thinking of around 6 members, to be fair. Okay, so we've got Tomlin, James, Harvey, George, Councillor Cubitt, and I will be in there as well. Okay, so that's 6 members. Councillor Canescu.
Yes, can we have a Lib Dem representative on there as well, please?
Yeah, don't see why not. Would that be yourself?
If you put me down provisionally, I'll talk to my colleagues and see if they want to propose anyone else.
Okay, that's good because that's 7. All right. Okay. So that's
I do the same. Sorry, I'm trying. I have got my hand up.
right. Well, we've got 7 people there, you know. And anyway, Councillor Waldridge, but
well,
okay.
I was going to suggest Gary may be interested. If not, I'm happy to take it back to my group to see who we'd like to put forward.
Okay, I will leave it with you with your name in there provisionally, unless Gary Watts wants to.
I'm happy to do it, but I'm aware that Gary's been on this committee longer than me, so he's probably got more to bring.
Okay, I will leave it provisionally. Okay,
so.
And there we go. Okay, right. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. Nice even number. Okay, so there we go. Does anybody want to run this? I mean, obviously I'm happy to, but I don't want to put myself forward. Okay, Councillor Harvey, are you up for this?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, if that's the way the committee would like it, I'm very happy to.
Okay, well, I'm happy to second you. Okay, if someone is happy to, well, I'll happy to nominate you. If someone is happy to second. Okay, Councillor. Okay, all right. Okay, so we're gonna have a task and finish group. What I will do is I will speak to Councillor Rafael and also Ruth O'Meara, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Harvey, you know, within 2 weeks. Okay, to see whether we can actually you know, scope something out. Is everybody happy with that?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we only have a couple more items. First one is item number 8, which is the COVID-19 motion. So just reading it out, it was resolved at a full council meeting held on the 16th of July 2020 to refer an aspect of the following motion to the Economic Planning and Housing Committee for consideration. The council records a vote of thanks for all the borough council's workers, bin collectors, doctors, nurses, paramedics, health assistants, porters, care workers, bus and train drivers, conductors and guards, transport workers, mechanics, maintenance workers, police, military, firefighters, teachers, teaching assistants, mail workers, shop workers, chefs, takeaway workers, delivery drivers, and anyone else performing a key job in the crisis. The council also records a vote of thanks to all the borough's volunteers, without whom society may well have fallen apart. Our thanks go out to organisations such as the BVA, Spotlight, Basingstoke Food Bank, Basingstoke COVID-19 Support Group, housing associations, churches, and anyone else all involved in the council-directed effort to help vulnerable people and key workers. And thanks also to the individual volunteers looking in on and delivering essential items to relatives or neighbours. That in recognition of the great job done locally by the aforementioned parties, this council, through the leader CX, engaged with the government to get a greater degree of information, autonomy and funding so we can better administer our borough through the various functions and local partnerships to ensure an optimal, safe transition out of lockdown and to minimise any new cases and maximise support for our local businesses and community organisations who are gazing into the abyss. That a retrospective analysis of the crisis be conducted by the Scrutiny Committee with a view to learning lessons and sharing best practice in the case of a second wave later this year, with a possible input and feed into a future public inquiry. The motion was amended to further agree reference to CP items relating in support to our communities and building council resilience, and to EPH regarding helping our businesses out of lockdown and breathing life into our economy. Okay, so that's the motion which we've been given. Okay, and I have to say, you know, reading our part in it, that the actual economic recovery framework goes a good deal to actually doing that. Okay, what does everybody else think? Councillor Konescu.
Thank you, Chair. I'd agree with you on that. I think, yeah, the discussion we've had earlier on this evening, I think, covers the point about helping our businesses out of lockdown and breathing new life into our economy. I think we're there. Personally.
That's what I think. Councillor Waldridge.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly the items tasked for this committee seems to have been met in this report. I don't want to lose sight of the stuff that's going to CEP. That I'm sure it won't be. And Ken has given us the commitment today that it won't be, but I just don't want it to get lost because we've agreed to not take this forward because it's already been incorporated. Thank you.
That's okay. I don't think it will get lost. If
No.
Reassurance. I know that Councillor Rattigan wants to have a word, but before he says so, obviously we have the chair of CP here on this committee, okay, in Paul Gaskill, and I'm sure that he won't let it go, and I'm sure that Councillor Rattigan won't let it go either. So thank you very much, Councillor Waldridge. Councillor Rattigan, would you like to say a few words? Councillor Rattigan.
You muted, Ken.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, even my fingers at this time don't work quick enough.
Yeah.
Just to say that the economic recovery framework is in place, but there is much more to do to acknowledge what can be done should we ever face another pandemic again or a second spike. And I think there is lessons to be learned. As we're not yet through it, I can't commit to when that would be, that review locally, but I am sure as the government review what's been done both centrally and regionally, we will definitely feed into that. And I would encourage all of you who've had dealings with your communities and individuals to say what you think could have been done better. And there are lots of mistakes, let's just be honest. We have made mistakes both locally and nationally. And what could be done better? What would we stop doing? Because some of the things we've done perhaps shouldn't have been done or were in duplication. And to be honest with each other. I think we need to be honest after a crisis to say what is good, what is bad, and what has worked well or poorly. So I encourage us all to take place in it, and I pledge that I will return to CEP to reiterate the administration's view on the COVID crisis and where we've worked with BVA and individual voluntary organisations to protect our residents. But I am up for that debate. I think there is something to be said, and certainly you as councillors who've had to deal with it on the ground, both in community centres and in the streets that you represent, I think we have an opportunity to get it better should, God forbid, this happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I think Ken said most of it there, but I'd just like to say one thing. We have been extremely lucky in this borough because we enjoy a very, very low incidence of COVID infections. Okay, we had a spike like everybody else did, but in recent weeks, if you look at the numbers and infections that we've had, it's very low compared to a lot of the places around the country. And that's down to our public. It's down to our residents who have acted very sensibly in all our communities to keep it low. And as far as the motion is concerned, yes, I think we've got a very good economic framework to start with. We've got to do that. As Ken just mentioned, it's too early for a lot of things to be changed, but at least we can start looking at where we can improve. And I think that it's the whole learning exercise. But hats off to all our residents who have kept and are keeping the rates low in the borough.
Yeah, here. Well done. Okay, so what I propose then with the motion is to effectively put it into review. I think it doesn't harm us actually put it into a review status. Okay, to come back in say maybe January. Okay, just to see that we've actually it's still current, etc., and that we're still on the ball. Okay, is that agreeable to the committee? Yeah, great. Okay, so again we can put that onto the work program. Okay, for a quick review. Okay, so I'd like to just call the meeting generally to an end. We've got the work program to go through. Okay, but well done everybody. Okay, if we just have a quick look at the work program, then
sorry, Chair, did we have any speakers on the work program? I'm sure I saw that earlier, but I could be wrong.
I spoke to Mr. Beavers, and he's going to go another route. Okay, which will mean that he will put a question to full council. Okay, on that, and go that way. So what I'm proposing is for the November meeting. Okay, is an update to the infrastructure delivery plan. Okay, and Mark Lambert is looking forward to delivering that to us. Okay, along with an update on the implementation of the transport strategy. Okay, which were a couple of things that really were sort of like coming forward. And then moving into January 2021, we have the AMR. Okay, which is due to come to us for 2019-2020. Okay, and then I'd also like to put in January, bring it back to committee, just a quick update, okay, on the economic recovery framework, because I think by that stage it'll have gone through cabinet, it'll have gone through potentially full council if it needed to do so, and you know, some of the actions would have been put in place. So I'd like to bring that back with the council's, with the committee's agreement. Also, kind of on the bottom, I'd like to put in a review of the COVID-19 motion. Okay, but I just like and put that in TBC. Okay, so we've got that coming through there. We also have, just turning over the page, we have a task and finish group, okay, which is still sub judice. Okay, so we can't really go any further on that, and I don't know whether the committee is happy to keep it there, okay, or whether to close that task and finish, and we've obviously got our new task and finish group on the climate change potential SPD. What's the committee's thoughts? Councillor Rattigan.
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt, but as I've already made a pledge this evening to bring a housing and well-being report back to this committee, I hope that I can arrange that for November. Obviously, I will get on to that tomorrow morning.
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to slot that in with your committee's approval.
I'm happy to do that. Is everyone okay with that? Yes. Health and well-being. Okay. All right, Ken, I'll put your name in there. Okay. Happy days. Okay, so
sorry, Chairman. That's great for the lead. It's
sorry,
great.
Councillor Cubitt. I actually saw Councillor Harvey's hand go up first. You're on mute, Councillor Harvey. Still on mute, Councillor Harvey. Yeah.
I was raising a point about the task and finish panel, Chair, so I'm happy to defer to Annalee on this particular point, Chair, because that's
okay. All right. Councillor Cubitt.
Just, it's very kind of the leader to offer to bring it in November, but that November meeting's going to be a huge meeting. I mean, normally we just talk about a transport strategy and we spend all evening on it. And if we've got the infrastructure delivery plan, which we haven't seen for 5 years, I think, and that's the one that I showed you all, 2016, with 190 million shortfall. That's 2 huge documents, and maybe we need to reschedule. I humbly suggest that it might be sensible to have it on another meeting night.
Okay. We can put it through for January. Okay, so the health and wellbeing report goes through to January. Okay, we leave the November as it is. Okay, Councillor Cubitt, is your hand still up? You're muted.
If I could just before Councillor Harvey, if the leisure park is still sub judice, which I don't know whether it is or not, but I'm anticipating that Councillor Harvey is actually going to say he still wants that task finish group to still exist, and I would concur with him. I don't know what the leisure park is going to look like going forward, because the world has changed forever. And so I don't know whether we just keep it in like a coma until we are permitted to talk about it, but then the economy changes.
Okay, I'm happy to keep it there. It was literally just to see what was going on. Okay, Councillor Harvey's agreeing with me to keep it there. Okay, Councillor Rattigan, do you want to come back, or is it just you haven't?
Yes, I do, Chair. I picked up your point. You've said health and well-being is actually housing and well-being. I think.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Laura James's point about the rented sector, how people are moving in and out of the rented sector, and maybe evictions, I think needs to be flashed up to this committee. So I think if I could say to you, it's going to be a housing and well-being, so as we tackle the 2 things, and therefore because they will be fairly substantive, I'm happy for them to be in January.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, so housing and well-being report, okay, from the leader, okay, moves to the 7th of January along with the AMR. Okay, Councillor Watts, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's the government's white paper, Planning for Future. When is the committee going to see light of that, and when are we going to make some comments to the government?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Watts. The check is in the post. I was speaking with Councillor Rafael about this literally the other day, and basically what we agreed was that I would wait until after this meeting tonight, and then I will arrange a briefing in the next couple of weeks, okay, from both Councillor Rafael and also Councillor Tristan Robinson, okay, to give us, as a committee, a briefing on the housing bill, and because I think it's that important that we all need to be aware. Okay, so that's what I was proposing to do, and I'm pleased that you reminded me. Okay, thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, Chair, forgive me for being awkward on that one, but are we going to be in time enough to have any influence on the agenda before?
No, we're not. No.
I think it's probably missed the point now, hasn't it? But we should still do it. We should really, and write to the responsible decision makers accordingly.
Sure, but I think it's important that we actually have a briefing so that we as a committee understand exactly what that housing bill, you know, is or how it's going to affect us. Which I think we all kind of know. So I will arrange that in the next 2 weeks. Okay, so watch out in your inboxes for potential days. It will be a Zoom meeting again. Okay, but I don't see at the moment any way of getting around that. But I would sincerely love to have got the committee around the table, however big. Okay, to actually have a face-to-face briefing. But there we go. So if that's acceptable to everybody. Okay, and no one else has anything to say. What I will say is I will close the meeting, and it's 22:29. Thank you very much for your attendance, and have a. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cubitt had a hand up. I think she's gone. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Okay, and have a pleasant evening. Okay, bye-bye.